Our story begins as he reincarnates as a dragon, and his first priority is finding a way to keep the mother dragon from killing him, simply because his parents are pure-blooded true dragons. And he, unfortunately, is nothing more than a wingless dragon beast. In the proud dragon race, pure-blooded younglings receive an inheritance of ancestral memory the very moment they are born. They are born decades ahead of other races, but as a dragon beast of impure blood, he receives no inheritance, and to be honest, his appearance is quite ugly. In this moment, we see her staring at him with a murderous gaze as she speaks. She tells him that his true name will be severed in the furnace of the dragon's heart. The mother dragon finally lowers her claws, planning to cast him out into the wild later so he can fend for himself. And he, too, realizes just how dangerous his situation has become. He realizes he has transmigrated into the most worthless dragon beast of the entire race. He wonders where his system is, desperately wishing for it to appear and save him. He tells himself he shouldn't have to resort to kneeling and begging for help. But then, to his surprise, a system actually responds. The Mountains and Seas Atlas modifier has been activated. We see that the host properties are already being modified. The Chaos bloodline has been obtained and successfully unlocked. A new talent is unlocked as well, the Chaotic Matter Bag. It can store all things and transform them for his own personal use. He recognizes this as the modifier he used while playing video games in his previous life. Unexpectedly, he now truly possesses the power of chaos. As a result, he begins to laugh, which immediately infuriates the mother dragon standing right beside him. She lowered her head and a massive claw swept toward him, slamming him directly against the wall. After picking himself up, he was covered in scratches and spat out a mouthful of blood. The mother dragon, Cartarsis, is a young dragon of 170 years with a body length of 20 meters. That single blow nearly took his life, which, to be honest, was a terrifying start to his new existence. He wondered if she still saw him as nothing more than a despicable dragon beast. He told himself that one should never mock a young dragon just for being born with nothing. Deep down, he threw harsh words at the mother dragon, but a second later, his stomach began to growl. But as we see him looking around his surroundings, there is absolutely nothing for him to eat. He was now gravely injured and on the verge of death, desperately needing to replenish his nutrients. It didn't matter. He simply sat down and began to bite into the ground with all his might. He bit off a clump of grass from the floor, chewing and swallowing it along with the dirt. Suddenly, he felt an inexplicable force in his body, providing him with highly efficient nutrition. Driven by desperation, he ignored the foul taste and buried his head in the dirt to feast like a wild animal. Meanwhile, we turn our attention to the rest of the mother dragon's litter. Aside from our protagonist, there are 3 other dragon eggs in the nest. At this very moment, all of them begin to hatch one after another. 2 of them are true young dragons, 1 male and 1 female. There is also another dragon beast like him, and the mother asks the 3 newborns for their true names. The 4th one, Rue, belongs to a bloodline of dragon beasts even weaker than his own. In this case, even the inheritance of a true name has completely vanished. He only managed to make it around the corner. Meanwhile, the mother dragon confirmed the true names of the 2 young dragons. After carefully examining their physical condition, she returned to the cave, carrying a large, foul-smelling clump of rotten mud in her jaws. She dropped it unceremoniously right in front of the 2 young dragons. Even if it was covered in insect repellent, it didn't seem to bother them. There was no problem for the true dragons, but our protagonist, watching from the side, was being treated quite brutally. He wondered if he could perhaps sneak closer to beg for a single bite. And what about the other dragon beast, the one born last? She was also preparing to join the 2 young dragons for the meal. However, the mother dragon blew a sharp breath directly toward that dragon beast. A powerful current of air sent her flying backward instantly. After hitting the ground and rolling several times, she curled into a ball and began to tremble. Obviously, the mother dragon's food was strictly reserved for the true dragon hatchlings. A mere dragon beast is not qualified to eat, a realization that quickly discouraged him from trying to grab a few bites himself. He told himself that the fish already smelled terrible and probably wasn't even tasty. To him, the dirt and the wood were far more delicious. They even had worms inside, he noted. But just as he was trying to comfort himself, the other dragon beast walked hesitantly toward him. Her eyes were shining with a sudden ferocity. It turned out that after seeing him so gravely injured, she actually wanted to eat him. Fortunately, his wounds had already improved significantly. Not to mention, he had just consumed enough to strengthen his body with much-needed nutrition. He pretended to be gravely injured, waiting to see what the dragon beast would do to him. He kept up the act of being badly hurt, patiently waiting for the dragon beast to make its move. A clever little ruse, to be honest. He continued to feign a serious injury, waiting for the dragon beast, to finally strike. He lay there, pretending to be wounded, just waiting for the dragon beast to act. He feigned his grave injuries, waiting for the dragon beast to make its move against him. He pretended to be near death, waiting for the dragon beast to do its worst. To all appearances, he was dying as he waited for the dragon beast to approach. He acted as if he were severely wounded, waiting for the dragon beast to finally do it. He kept pretending to be hurt, waiting for the dragon beast to act, which, naturally, was the only way to stay safe. He remained still, feigning a deep wound while waiting for the dragon beast. He continued his act of being gravely injured, waiting for the dragon beast to make its move. He pretended to be at death's door, simply waiting for the dragon beast to do what it intended. He feigned his injuries and waited for the dragon beast to act, maintaining that particular Pontiac lifestyle he seemed to have adopted. He pretended to be hurt while waiting for the beast. After all, just because he couldn't gnaw on them now didn't mean he couldn't later. It's always wise to stockpile food, since the mother dragon certainly wasn't going to feed a despicable dragon beast like him. Shortly after that, he returned to the cave to get some much-needed sleep. Although he had no desire whatsoever to live with those 3 dragons, with his current strength, leaving was out of the question. Venturing into the world was still far too dangerous, so before he could sail with the wind at his back, he had to rely on himself. We see the mother dragon lying on her back upon the beach, seemingly at peace with the world. He was breathing with difficulty, having just drunk a belly full of water while swallowing a few small fish and shrimp in the process. He immediately stood up and began to think. Even if he learned to swim now, the speed of a fish in the water, well, it was definitely faster than his own. He couldn't catch them at all, not by hand, anyway. After a brief reflection, he remembered that as a transmigrator, he possessed a certain intellectual advantage. He returned to the cave, dug up the fish bones he had buried the day before, and pulled one out. Then, with a great deal of patience, he began to polish it using a stone. We returned to the cave where he opened his stash of buried fish bones and selected a particularly sturdy one. He polished it carefully with a stone, returning to his task and working the bones with focused intent. Then he stood up and began to prepare the bait, finding a worm the size of a paper knot in the forest and resisting the urge to pop it into his own mouth. Instead, he skewered it onto the hook and tossed it into the river. As it turned out, an entire hour passed without a single movement in the water. He wondered if he should prepare a different spot, but just as he was about to give up, a massive force suddenly tugged at the vine in his hand. Good grief, it's a big one, he thought, as he stumbled forward without even realizing it. After reacting to the shock, he quickly grabbed the vine and began to pull back with all his might. This fish was far too strong in its own element. He simply couldn't face it head-on. After pulling for several minutes, he found himself running out of energy, which is when a new plan occurred to him. He quickly tied the vine in his hand to a large tree nearby, letting nature do the heavy lifting for him. The fish in the water was so powerful that it actually shook the massive tree. Every time the creature's strength began to wane, he gave the line a couple of decidedly inhuman tugs. Finally, once the fish had completely exhausted its energy, he hauled it out with one final pull. This fish was enormous, roughly a meter long, making it nearly the same size as he was. He was so hungry that he couldn't wait another second to bite into the fish's belly. The tender, nutrient-rich meat practically melted away as it filled his stomach. It was absolutely delicious. After all, dragons were always meant to be meat eaters. In no time at all, he devoured the entire fish until not a single trace of it remained. After letting out a satisfied burp, he lay down to rest beneath the shade of a large tree. By devouring the ironjaw fish, he gained a significant boost to his physical energy. With Tulu's notification of a new passive skill, fish oil, he felt a vague change occurring within his body. He seemed to have a newfound affinity for the water, and upon diving in to test it, he discovered something remarkable. Despite never having learned, he could now swim through the water as freely as a fish. After that little experiment, he climbed back onto the shore feeling only slightly tired. A dragon's natural talent is decades ahead of any other race, which is quite the advantage. Simply by eating and sleeping day after day, his strength would naturally double. And if he ever hoped to escape his mother's watchful gaze, he needed to grow stronger as quickly as possible. For the time being, sleeping was his most profitable option, a tough job, but someone had to do it. We returned to the cave, where he found his brother and sister busy eating. They were feasting on the stinky fish that the mother dragon had stored away for them. Black dragons have a rather peculiar habit of storing their captured prey for long periods. They prefer to wait until the meat rots, though as a mere dragon beast, he wasn't even invited to the table. Suddenly, the mother dragon's heavy gaze fell directly upon him. She had assumed he had run away for good, and honestly, she didn't expect him to return at all. She narrowed her eyes, realizing almost immediately that his body had undergone a change. In just a single day, he had grown as much as a normal young dragon does in over a month. In the dragon world, this would usually be considered a remarkably strong constitution. It was a pity, then, that he was classified as nothing more than a lowly dragon beast. Even the most powerful dragon beast is viewed as a humble servant when standing before a true giant dragon. After a few more disinterested glances, the mother dragon simply lost interest in him. We see him watching his 2 siblings, who were lucky enough to eat their fill without doing any work. Naturally, a sense of bitterness began to stir deep within his heart. He looked at his foolish siblings and realized that even though he ate less than they did, he worked much harder, knowing that soon the mother dragon would be relying on him for food. The spirit of a tireless worker was practically burning inside his small body. Suddenly, a voice called him an insignificant subject, asking how he dared to sleep in the same cave. The one speaking was his brother, a dragon who went by a rather grand name. Fuergia K was his name, and he mocked our protagonist for seemingly forgetting who his master was. He wondered why his brother was acting so incredibly aggressive for no reason. Looking at them side by side, Fuergia K was actually a whole size smaller than he was. In terms of individual combat, he felt quite confident he could rub Fuergia K's face right into the dirt. However, he feared that if he gave him a proper beating, the mother dragon might just kill him too. He looked at him and asked how such a weak subject dared to call himself a master. Deciding his name was far too long, he simply told him he would call him Fuergia from now on. He asked if there was a problem, pointing out the rules of their kind with a certain delicate irony. And indeed, we see the mother dragon, who was just about to intervene, immediately calm herself. The dragon race respects strength above all. If a true dragon cannot defeat a dragon beast, he has only his own uselessness to blame. He astutely perceived that, in the end, the mother dragon didn't really care what happened. Even though this little black dragon had a royal heritage, his brain was no match for a seasoned traveler. To refute this, Zorgas jumped up immediately, absolutely furious at the disrespect. But our protagonist didn't back down, charging forward and colliding with Zorgas like a monstrous stallion. Then, something unexpected happened. Although he appeared larger, Zorgas's raw strength actually surpassed his own. He wondered how it was possible for his brother's strength to rival that of a dragon beast like himself. He told him he wasn't worthy of being a dragon and should go back to his egg to develop for 2 more years. Deep down, he began to think seriously about his next move, though on the surface, he only showed a hint of his thoughts. Zorgas was driven to a frenzy by those words, brandishing his dragon claws and charging once more. This time he used his full power, and just as they were about to collide, a flash of movement carried him behind his opponent. He wrapped both palms upward from behind the dragon's wings, instantly locking Zorgas in a tight chokehold. At the same time, he coiled his legs firmly around the other dragon's waist to secure his position. This move was certainly strange for a dragon, but as we can see, it was remarkably effective. It didn't matter how much strength Zorgas used. He was completely trapped. He could never escape our protagonist's control, and soon he was gasping as his physical energy drained away from the struggle. He cursed him as an inferior bastard, desperately demanding that he get off him at once. With a fierce gaze, he showed that while the mother dragon's protection was real, it didn't mean he lacked a temper of his own. His claws then began to slide slowly over Zorgas's neck and shoulders. Those dragon claws, sharp as blades, sliced directly through the other's protective scales. Zorgas let out a moan of pain, while our protagonist mocked him, asking if such a superficial defeat was worthy of a dragon. He prepared to use his spiritual ice collapse power, intending to plunge his opponent into eternal silence. Unexpectedly, the sheer pain actually made the useless Zorgas burst into tears. At that moment, the mother dragon's eyes, sensing the impending defeat, finally snapped open. She declared they could fight for 10 years if they wished, but neither lethal pain nor killing would be permitted. In the end, it seems the mother dragon simply couldn't bear to watch one of her own offspring be slaughtered. Annoyed by her partiality, he reluctantly let go, and Zorgas immediately ran to the mother dragon to cry the moment he was free. She told the useless thing to get lost, and then her gaze turned toward our protagonist, though she didn't say a word. He clearly saw the warning written in her eyes. The ferocity he had just displayed represented a genuine threat to her other 2 children. He realized that if he didn't restrain himself, she might kill him right then and there, a thought that, deep down, he found quite unfair. On the surface, however, he didn't dare show even a hint of his resentment. Instead, he immediately found a quiet corner and went straight to sleep. This time, his slumber lasted for 5 full days. When he finally woke up after those 5 days, his body had undergone some very obvious changes. His muscles were fuller, and his overall size had grown quite a bit as well. Looking to the side, we see the other 2 young dragons were busy eating. The mother dragon had prepared a mountain of food for them, a literal hill of meat to ensure their proper development. But even now, their size remained half a head smaller than our protagonists. Zorgas glared at him with pure hatred, but the moment he looked back, Zorgas sharply lowered his head. One could say he was as cowardly as he was spiteful, a charming combination, really. He stretched his body and prepared for the worst. Since he didn't dare sleep more, he decided to go out and hunt to fill his stomach. But just as he was preparing to leave the cave, his sister Astyra suddenly stopped him. She asked what he wanted, noting that their mother was going to sleep for a while. She claimed the right to distribute the food, mockingly asking if he'd like to enjoy some of that delicious rotten meat. It was then he realized that the mother dragon's heavy snoring was already echoing from the depths of the cave. When he asked for her conditions, she demanded that he surrender and submit to her. Astyra arched her neck high, but since she was shorter than him, the effect was somewhat diminished. She was forced to tilt her head back quite far just to look him in the eye. He simply replied that his upbringing wouldn't allow for such a thing. He immediately turned to leave, but then Astyra tossed a dead carcass toward him. It was a magical beast, specifically a shadow tiger. He immediately swallowed hard as his stomach let out an audible growl. Magical beasts are creatures capable of using magic, and their bodies are naturally saturated with magical power. Faced with such a temptation, he felt as though his hunger was finally starting to overwhelm him. He offered a slight smile, telling her that she was a dragon of truly remarkable precision. He promised to do whatever she asked in the future, claiming he had wanted to join her for some time. His admiration for her, he said, was like a mighty river that flows without end. Ystira, a little dragon only 6 days old, actually blushed a bit at such high praise. She accepted his submission with a haughty air, telling him to be quiet and eat. To be honest, anyone who doesn't take advantage of a bargain like this is a fool. What is dignity, anyway? Can you eat it? In this moment, he didn't hesitate for a second. He placed his hand on this massive source of magical power and began to extract it with all his might. As we might have expected, it was a truly formidable magical creature. The moment that pure energy flooded his body, it filled every single one of his veins. That enormous magical power began to accumulate within him like a solid entity. It was absorbed without reservation, and seeing him lying there satisfied, Ystira bit her lip. To show her generosity, she had specifically chosen the most powerful magical beast to give him. But seeing him eating so greedily with his face covered in grease made Ystira quite furious. However, in order to maintain the legendary generosity of the dragon race, she couldn't say a word as he finished devouring the shadow tiger. And here we see a new skill has been acquired, shadow concealment. Once activated, it allows him to briefly merge his entire body with the surrounding shadows. Furthermore, his analysis speed has increased by 20%, which is a nice little bonus. And here we notice something surprising. The image of the claw in the catalog of mountains and seas has changed. That section is now glowing, and since he wants to speed up his evolution, he decides it's time to explore the outside world. He soon reaches a nearby forest, a place filled with small puddles and mud, all covered in a thick, lingering miasma. The natural energy here is relatively weak, making the atmosphere feel heavy and stagnant. To be honest, this territory isn't very good. It's the kind of place only black dragons could truly enjoy. Usually, only dragon species that prefer damp and dark environments would ever choose to settle in a spot like this. We see that the mother dragon has built her nest nearby, tucked away in the river valley. The river flows slowly here, and based on the geographic knowledge from his previous life, he knows this is significant. He reasons that heavier metals and stones settle in slow currents, meaning precious minerals or gems might be washed into this area. As he walks slowly along the riverbed, something suddenly catches his eye and makes him pause in surprise. He spots something glowing brightly on a dead tree standing right beside the water. After moving closer to investigate, he discovers a strange plant that looks remarkably like a lantern. Upon closer inspection, he realizes it is actually a uniform growth, a peculiar fungus of some kind. The inside is hollow and filled with the cloyingly sweet scent of rotting fruit. Of course, he has no idea what this actually is, but that rarely stops him. It doesn't matter much to him. He simply tears off a large piece and tosses it directly into his mouth. It tastes sweet and fragrant, though he quickly notices his body is starting to feel a little numb. He has consumed a paralyzing lantern mushroom, and his resistance to paralysis increases by 1 point. His poison resistance also increases, and he finds that after eating it, the numbness and discomfort gradually fade away. Seeing no other path forward, he begins to devour large chunks of it, but unfortunately, the benefits don't seem to stack further. It seems the mushroom can only provide a single attribute improvement at a time. He continues walking and eating along the way, clutching a large bundle of lantern mushrooms in his hands. When he realizes he can't hold them all, he stops and begins to strip vines from a nearby tree. He attempts to weave a basket for himself, but after struggling for quite a while, he discovers he really isn't suited for manual labor and nearly tangles himself up like a mummy. Frustrated, he immediately snaps the vines, throws them to the ground with a heavy sigh, and gives up on the idea entirely. However, just at that moment, a vine covered in sharp thorns suddenly sprouts from beneath his feet. It wraps tightly around his body and drags him toward the nearby bushes. Before he can even react, we see he has already been swallowed by a pitcher plant over 2 meters tall. This particular species is known as the symbiotic bloodvine dragon. It is a symbiotic plant, and usually, if a human or any other creature wanders in here by mistake, their fate is sealed. Once soaked in this highly corrosive solution, their skin would begin to dissolve almost instantly. But of course, our protagonist possesses the bloodline of the black dragon. Though he is momentarily stunned to be trapped in this organic cage, the acid cannot cause him any real harm at all. He lowers his head and stares curiously at the corrosive solution pooling around him. He decides to take a sip, even smacking his lips as if he were tasting a fine wine. It is sour with a hint of sweetness, stinging his throat slightly, rather like a carbonated fruit juice, to be honest. Having finished his evaluation, he opens his mouth wide and begins to gulp down the corrosive liquid directly. By drinking the bloodvine stomach acid, his corrosion and poison resistance increase, and his short-term healing capacity rises by 20%. After letting out a satisfied burp, the Dragon Master raises his fist and smashes it against the lid, sending it flying. He slowly climbs out of the plant, noticing that the lingering ache in his legs has finally begun to fade. It turns out that lingering ache was blood pain, a sign he had almost forgotten his own inner darkness. He tears the vines away and ties the pitcher plant directly to his body, turning it into a makeshift pack. With his natural backpack ready, he eats and drinks as he goes, harvesting a vast quantity of fantastic plants along the way. He isn't at all worried about powerful monsters appearing to ruin his stroll. Because, as we know, the Dragon Mother is right here acting as a massive deterrent. Any magical beasts wandering in or out of this area have already been cleared away by her. Our protagonist has another purpose in mind. However, he needs to find a cave. The physical changes he is undergoing are becoming more obvious by the moment. If he stays with the Dragon Mother, it would be far too easy for her to notice that something is wrong. As he continues his walk, a small hill eventually appears before him. At the very top, we see a naturally formed stone cave waiting for a tenant. He runs toward the cave entrance with a sense of genuine excitement. Whether it's the size or the general surroundings, he finds himself quite satisfied with the find. But then, he instinctively wrinkles his nose and frowns. Something isn't quite right here. He immediately begins to dig into the dirt on the cave floor to see what lies beneath. Buried under the soil, he finds a grim collection of numerous animal skeletons. After confirming that no dangerous magical beasts are currently lurking inside, he heads deeper in, only to find the ground littered with even more skeletons and animal pelts. After rummaging through these remains for a while, he discovers a few courier items mixed in. There is even human clothing here, which naturally makes him curious enough to keep searching. Almost immediately, he discovers a travel bag made of sheepskin hidden among the debris. Inside this sheepskin bag, he finds matches, a map, and a few strange-looking stones. He takes out a match and strikes it, and a flicker of light instantly cuts through the darkness of the cave. The matches still work. Fortunately, he sets the tools aside and gathers some dry wood to start a proper fire. By the flickering light of the flames, he begins to carefully examine the map he found. As it turns out, this is a map of the Spirit Supplement Swamp. Even though he can't read the words, he can roughly guess the meaning of the various markings and images. One of those markings, we see, clearly indicates a route leading out of the swamp. Moments later, he takes a closer look at the stones from the sheepskin bag under the firelight. One of the stones, a deep blood-red gold, gives off a faint, pulsing glow. He can feel the abundant magic contained within it, vibrating against his palm. Without a moment's hesitation, he swallows it whole, and the magic explodes inside his mouth. Through the instinctive absorption of his gluttony skill, he manages to gain a trace of that magic. He puts away the remaining gems, which, to his disappointment, don't seem to hold any magic at all. Next, he gives the cave a simple renovation, clearing out the skeletons that were giving off such a foul stench. At the same time, he begins to pile giant rocks at the cave's entrance. He does this to prevent other creatures from wandering in, but shortly after, his stomach begins to growl again. He decides to find a river, fashioning a hook just like last time to catch himself a meal. But this time, after eating the fish he caught, it doesn't provide him with any new talents or skills. Just as he is lost in thought while eating his fish, he feels a sudden, sharp tug on the hook. We see the vine pull taut. This force, as it turns out, is much greater than that of the iron crocodile he encountered in the river last time. He tied the vine to a large tree, just like before, but this fish, well, this fish is far more interesting. The struggle itself is quite curious. It seems almost intelligent. If he doesn't use force, the creature on the other end won't either. With a thundering leap, he dove into the pond and began swimming toward the large, struggling fish. After a long while, a rather miserable cry echoed from the pond. He struggled back to shore, bleeding, with 3 poisonous spines stuck, of all places, right in his rear. Enduring the pain, he pulled the spines out and tried to suck the venom from the wound, but he accidentally overdid it. He ended up swallowing the poisonous blood instead. A few kicks of his legs later, and he collapsed right there. He remained there on the ground for quite some time. When he finally woke up again, 2 days had already passed. To be honest, he certainly hadn't expected to nearly meet his end at the hands of a poisonous fish. And the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He gave the vine a tug and discovered that something was still pulling back. His catch hadn't escaped yet. Determined to settle the score, he ran upstream and used sawdust, waste, and herbs to dam the water. The wait for the pond to dry didn't feel long at all, considering how much he wanted his revenge. He then took out those poisonous spines he had pulled from his backside earlier. Using some wooden sticks and the vine, he fashioned them into 3 makeshift spears. After about a day, the creature that had humiliated him with those 3 spines finally surfaced. He used the vine to haul the fish out, revealing a massive creature nearly 2 meters long. On its back, we see 3 sharp, black spines, the very same ones that caused him so much trouble. The poisonous fish glared at him, suddenly arched its back, and lunged forward to launch an attack. Those poisonous spines were aimed directly at his kidneys, a rather precarious situation to be in. Terrified, he threw himself out of the way immediately and landed face first in the pond's mud. He cursed his luck. His backside was fine, but if those had hit, they would have pierced his kidneys. and being left powerless for the rest of his life was a fate he found truly terrible to contemplate. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became, so he went and grabbed a large wooden club. He struck it repeatedly, but even after a long beating, the log broke while the poisonous fish remained stubbornly alive. Finally, he took out the fish-spine spear he had just fashioned and stabbed it with all his might, killing the creature. After that, he hauled the massive poisonous fish all the way back to his cave. Using flint to strike a fire, he began the slow process of roasting his hard-won prize. He even sprinkled some bittersweet plants over the fish to add a bit of seasoning. A subtle aroma emerged immediately, and as soon as it was cooked, he pulled it close and began to devour it. In no time at all, he had finished off the entire fish, which weighed hundreds of kilos. As he swallowed the poisonous spines and meat, something strange happened. He gained a new talent. His body developed venom-resistant bone spines. In an instant, the joints and bone protrusions on his back evolved into sharp spikes. He let out a satisfied burp and lay down right then and there to fall fast asleep. When he opened his eyes again, his size had increased once more by the time he returned to the lair. The two little dragons, seeing him return, actually mistook him for an invading magical beast. He was now nearly 3 meters tall, looking quite fierce and, to be honest, rather terrifying. Nisad asked him where he had been and why it had taken him so long to return. She even wondered aloud if he was trying to avoid sharing his food with her. The haughty attitude of this little female dragon is quite irritating, but Isti holds the power to distribute the food. If he pleases her, he can secure a steady flow of magical beasts, especially since he hasn't evolved in quite some time. Isti was feeling rather unhappy, but seeing him now, looking so fierce and terrifying, she swallowed hard with a touch of fear. Slowly, he lowers his head and comes face to face with Isti. Terrified of what might happen next, Isti takes 2 cautious steps back. But then, in a sudden move, he sits directly on the ground, which startles Isti even more. He begins to explain that it wasn't his fault, acting as though he were addressing a great lady. He tells her he went to the pond for water, found a jewel, and fell into a ravine while trying to retrieve it. He claims he nearly died trying to return, and then turns around so Isti can see the wounds on his backside. To Isti's utter perplexity, he then pulls a dark red gemstone out of his backpack. He declares that no matter how grave his wounds or how much he suffers, it is all worth it just to give her this gem. He even claims that if he were to die for her, he would have no regrets whatsoever. With an expression of great generosity and feigned pain, he presses the ruby into Isti's hand. And looking at the beautiful gem in her palm, Isti finds herself completely stunned. She begins to wonder if this brother of hers truly loves and cares for her this much. To be perfectly honest, Isti had originally only forced his submission as part of a cold strategy. She wanted to use him to control his brother, Zoogia, to stabilize her own position, never truly seeing him as a brother. But she never expected him to be so genuinely kind to her. Isti, being a young and inexperienced dragon, was immediately moved by this display of affection. She admits she misjudged him and invites him to eat as a reward for his apparent loyalty. "I shall choose a magical beast to grant you," she declares, and hearing this, he turns away as if to hide his tears from Isti. But in reality, he was struggling to hold back a fit of laughter. Deep down, he thinks this young dragon is far too easy to deceive. Now there will be another magical beast to feast upon, and soon after, Isti brings out a creature resembling a sheep. It is an illusory light-horned spirit, a creature whose horns can refract light. They are used to create mirages, and we see that Isti's detailed explanation catches him completely by surprise. He wonders how she could possibly know this, since their mother captures all the food for the 2 young dragons. And this spiritual sheep, as it turns out, was no exception to that rule. How could Isti be so familiar with the specific habits of such a magical beast? The answer lies in an inherited skill of the dragon clan known as the Dragon's Eye. Its effect is quite remarkable, allowing the user to see through to the very essence of all things. With that said, Isti begins to recite a spell from the ancient history of the dragon clan. As the rhythmic dragon language is spoken, Isti's eyes begin to glow with a strange light. She scans the gem in her hand, and a fragment of information about the red stone flows directly into her mind. It is the red jade of astonishing silence, capable of reflecting any damage received back onto the attacker. She tells him he is incredibly lucky to have found such a rare and powerful treasure. If this were placed in human society, it could likely buy half of a city. He is still marveling at the magic of the dragon's eye, but he freezes in shock upon hearing that last part. He stops her mid-sentence, asking her to repeat what she just said in complete disbelief. Hearing that the gem is so valuable, he immediately wants to snatch it back, which, naturally, is a bit late for that. But Isti simply snorted and swallowed the gem in a single gulp, paying no mind to the way he stood there with his teeth clenched. He hadn't paid much attention to it. At the time, the gem just looked like a dark reddish-orange stone, so he hadn't given it much importance. To be honest, he never expected that such a valuable object would be given away so easily. There was nothing left to do, so he was forced to swallow the Phantom Light prize while practically holding back tears. And just like that, another skill was activated. Phantom Light can emit a dazzling glow to blind enemies and even generate an illusory object. At the same time, we see the body of Taotai on the Sinai map begin to glow with a new light. Observing the portrait of Taotai on the Sinai map carefully, it seems almost all of its characteristics have finally been activated. Only the eyes remain to be awakened, and once they are, he can finally evolve into the legendary dragon beast, Taotai. He had already tried consuming many different magical beasts with powerful eyes, hoping for a breakthrough. But he still couldn't light them up, which brings us back to what Isti mentioned about a specific skill in the Dragon Clan's heritage. And what exactly is this skill? It is the ability to discern the true nature of all things, known as the Dragon's Eye. According to Isti, the Dragon's Eye is a resonance system of soul and blood created by the two supreme dragon gods before their extinction. It provides an automatic infusion of knowledge and historical memories to ensure the purity of the lineage and the continuation of their civilization. When a member of the Dragon Clan reaches a specific age or strength, they can activate the corresponding part of this heritage. But for a dragon beast like him, with such low blood purity, he can only receive a very fragmented version of these memories. Aside from his true name and the dragon language, it could be said that he truly has nothing at all. He felt completely left in the dark, and he told himself that once he evolved into an archaic dragon body, he would definitely find a way to break through the limitations of this Dragon Clan heritage. Just as he was lost in these deep thoughts, we see Isti retreat into a quiet corner of the cave. Slowly, she spat out the precious blood jade he had given her, showing that she hadn't actually swallowed it after all. This gem emits a faint, dark red light, and it really is quite beautiful. Even though she is a mixed blood dragon beast, she is still rather slow on the uptake. He is a great dragon. 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 As this is the clearest story in the world, some time ago, just like in the reformatory. The master is right there with him, since the manipulated Irene is also a great dragon. If you are also there, at the base of the secret mouth. A month passed, Mother Dragon still hasn't woken from her slumber, and our three siblings now face a serious problem. The food has run out, and Mother Dragon, to ensure her sleep isn't disturbed, placed a barrier inside the cave where she rests. This type of magical barrier is simply impossible for three young dragons to break through. In fact, giant dragons can survive by eating stones, grass, and dirt, but for the proud Dragon Clan, that is quite another matter. Eating such things is simply shameful, so to get real food, they have no choice but to go out and hunt. He has plenty of hunting experience, and he has even stored a great deal of food in his own secret cave. But, of course, he doesn't want to reveal his secrets, so he can only follow Isti and Zorger out to hunt. He felt they were getting a bit far from the damp areas they knew. Perhaps they should hunt further inland, he suggested, but Zorger rejected the idea immediately. Zorger only knows how to please his master to get food. He doesn't even dare to hunt for himself. He told him that the thin dragon lineage in his body should make him ashamed, especially since Mother Dragon dislikes him. Isti, who should be their sister, holds the power to distribute the food, and Zorger feels he must submit to her. Furthermore, since he often brings back prey and wins Isti's favor, he consistently gets better food than Zorger does. This has caused Zorger's development to be relatively slow now, and if it weren't for him, the food Mother Dragon left behind. In reality, that food would have been enough for the two of them, and they wouldn't have needed to risk hunting. So the current situation has left Zorger feeling quite resentful toward you. I'm only worried about you, you say, turning to look directly at Zorger. Zorger is taken aback. He thought you were surrendering and was already preparing to continue his mockery. Who would have thought your next sentence would make his dragon face turn as red as a beet? I'm worried that a useless creature like you might run into an ordinary magical beast and end up as its dinner. Of course, you have no intention of truly arguing with an idiot dragon like this one. Sometimes, a simple, sharp word is the greatest pleasure of all. What did you say? Zorger immediately bares his teeth and spits a rotten dragon lizard from his mouth. The dragon lizard represents the strongest offensive talent that true dragons possess. Different types of dragons, as we know, possess different characteristics within their dragon lizard abilities. Even the attack of a young dragon can easily destroy a fully armored knight. You try to dodge, but what makes it truly unreasonable is that the dragon lizard also possesses powerful anti-magic properties. This means the magic shields of most wizards simply cannot withstand the impact of such a strike. And for the Dragon Clan, spitting a lizard at an opponent is a formal declaration of war. The reason Zorger dares to provoke you is quite simple. He is filled with confidence. He tells himself you might have a trick or two, but that you still need much more time to develop. But no matter what Zorger says, he also possesses a complete lineage and the heritage of a giant dragon. He knows that in close-quarters combat, he would likely lose to you. But now that a giant dragon lizard is being spat your way, it's not at all certain your current physique can withstand it. Fine, you decide. I've chosen to go hunting on the outskirts. He suggested they save that internal fighting energy for the hunt instead. A reasonable suggestion, one might think. And so, they set off to find a meal. We see them searching the skies for a long time, but they found no trace of any prey. After all, almost everything worth hunting in this immediate area had already been snatched up by the Dragon Mother. He suggested they try their luck at the swamps and ponds. There were plenty of aquatic animals there, or so he hoped. The two dragons had no other choice, so they followed him toward the murky waters of a swamp. Almost as soon as the three of them arrived, they spotted some branch crocodile magical beasts. These are the auxiliary spirit claw crocodiles that make this place their home. Now, he had no intention of risking his life to catch these particular magical beasts. In his mind, it was more than enough to just pull a few fish from the shallow waters. There was really no need to mess with things that could bite back, which, to be honest, is a very sensible outlook. However, the proposal was rejected on the spot by Isti, who insisted on hunting the crocodiles. If she wanted to go, she could go right ahead. He wasn't about to go off and die for a snack. After that, it didn't matter how much the other two young dragons scolded or mocked him. He simply wasn't willing to go wading into that swamp. He had food stored away, so there was no need to take unnecessary risks. He decided to let them do as they pleased while he stayed safe on the shore. But the others warned him he shouldn't even think about trying to share in their prey later. Isti gave a cold snort, immediately shook her wings, and flew straight toward the swamp. How foolish. With just a moment's thought, one would realize this is obviously within the Dragon Mother's territory. Yet, groups of swamp crocodiles still live here, which means there must be something the Dragon Mother herself cannot resolve. He stood on the shore to watch, occasionally pulling a few swamp worms from the mud to fill his stomach. We see that Isti and Falga's plan was actually quite simple. They began to flush out the swamp crocodiles from both sides, gradually isolating one or two of them. Then, they used flame dragon lizards to launch their attack. The swamp crocodiles were roasted directly until they began to scream. On the other side, Falga also made use of corrosive dragon lizards. He killed a swamp crocodile. Look at that. This is the power of a true dragon. But in that moment, he realized something was very wrong. The intelligence of these swamp crocodiles isn't particularly high, to be honest. Only when the two young dragons chased them did they crawl back toward the pools in the swamp. And yet, from the very beginning, these crocodiles had already started hiding in a great hurry. Imagine the scene. He looked down at the puddle beneath his feet, a puddle that was originally quite calm. Now it had begun to ripple, as if something massive were about to emerge. Two lantern-like lights suddenly rose out of the murky depths of the swamp. When he looked closer, he saw these weren't lanterns at all, but the eyeballs of an enormous monster. Something was coming. He rushed to call out a warning to the others at the top of his lungs. The two young dragons also noticed the strange objects rising from the swamp. The monster finally emerged from the thick mud of the swamp. It was a giant Flyn evil king, a creature of truly massive proportions. Just the exposed part of its head alone measured 4 meters across. Isti, being the closest, also spotted this enormous beast and immediately prepared to flee. The Flyn evil king opened its maw and spat countless globs of poisonous slime at Isti. The venom shot toward Isti like a sharp sword, striking her dragon wings. She immediately lost control and fell from the sky. She crashed violently onto a small circular island right in the center of the swamp. The Flyn evil king roared, opening its bloody mouth toward Isti as she lay at the edge of the island. The young dragon was utterly terrified, rolling and crawling desperately toward the center of the circular island. Half of the giant crocodile's body hauled itself up onto the small island. Then, it looked around cautiously, as if it were alert to some other presence. It was terrified of something, a detail he noticed with sharp intuition. This Flyn evil king clearly does not want to leave the safety of the swamp. At that moment, we see that Zurgia has already returned to the scene. That creature is the Flyn evil king, she explained. It is the one opponent who has defeated her the most. She urged them to run quickly. Even the once arrogant black dragon cub was now visibly shaken. If the apostle who was just attacked falls into the water, it would be a disaster. In such a place, death is certain. It turns out that before the Dragon Mother arrived, this evil king was the true lord of the Flyn swamp. The Dragon Mother seized his territory, but because the mud is the evil king's domain, he can fight the black dragon on equal terms. And so, she allowed the evil king to retain this final piece of territory for himself. This is also the reason why his domain is located so dangerously close to the dragon's lair. Nearly all the prey in the region has been captured, yet this swamp alone still harbors many palms. We must leave quickly. If that thing targets us, we won't be able to escape even if we wanted to. Zurgia urged a swift retreat, seemingly unconcerned with poor Isti, who remained trapped in the center of that circular island. Isti soon realized that her two older siblings fully intended to flee and leave her behind. At this moment, she is completely stranded in the middle of the island. If they leave, even if the evil king dares not climb onto land, she will eventually be caught and die there. He tilted his head, lost in deep thought as he considered the grim situation. He knew that if Isti were to die, all the prey caught by the Dragon Mother in the future would go to Zurgia. That would mean no food for him. However, even so, he cannot simply risk his life for Isti. Hold on a little longer, he told her, as they were going to find the Dragon Mother for help. Hearing this, a small flicker of hope began to rise in Isti's heart. The evil king, after hesitating to crawl ashore, turned around and submerged himself back into the dark water. But Isti's dragon intuition told her otherwise. She could feel him watching her greedily from beneath the surface. "Can you stay with me for a while?" she asked, admitting quite simply that she was afraid. In this desperate moment, she forgot all about the typical dragon arrogance and begged a brother to stay. In that case, he decided that Naseid should stay there on the island with her. Since he can fly, he promised they would soon find the dragon mother to rescue Isti. Now, the hope of Isti being saved depends entirely on the arrival of the dragon mother. But as we watch Zergia's retreating back, it becomes clear that Isti's chances of survival are very slim this time. Sure enough, Zergia came to a halt not far from the dragon's nest. He told himself that if Isti died at the hands of the evil king, all the food caught by the dragon mother would belong to him. Besides, he had reached a point where he simply couldn't stand Isti anymore. A truly wicked idea began to take root in Zergia's mind. He then flew back toward the swamp, calling out to see if Naseid was still there. That dark thought continued to fester in Zergia's mind as he approached. Returning to the swamp, he checked once more to see if Naseid had remained at his post. Isti's voice drifted over, sounding breathless and desperate, asking if he had really left her. Ever since Zergia departed, poor Isti had been calling out for reassurance every few minutes. The little dragon called out again and again without stopping, which, to be honest, was becoming quite annoying. We see Naseid half reclined in a tree, while before him, a clawed crocodile has been torn into several pieces. This was the prey the two young dragons had caught earlier, the flame-devouring clawed crocodile. From this, he gains a nutritional support ability, ensuring his attacks now carry a deadly poison effect. Furthermore, while in stealth mode, his damage output increases by a full 50%. Isti, receiving no response for a long time, was certain that he had abandoned her as well. She begged Naseid to stay, her voice trembling as the sounds of waves hitting the circular island echoed around her. The little dragon was so terrified she began to cry, while Naseid simply watched, noting that Zergia likely wasn't coming back. He stood up and pretended to leave, ignoring her frantic commands to stay, reminding her that everyone fends for themselves in a disaster. He claimed he had no choice but to go, especially since she never even treated him like a brother, only ever using his name. Shaking uncontrollably with fear, Isti's voice is very low and timid, yet tinged with a bit of anger and shame as she admits she is clearly inferior as a dragon beast. She asks how he dares to intimidate her like this, and since she can't hear clearly, she tells him she's leaving and calls him a bad guy for taking advantage of a dragon in danger. Isti screams loudly, her words mixed with sobs, reminding him how he usually snatches the treasures she brings, and asks if he knows how terrible it is to be on the brink of death. She accuses him of trying to set conditions even now. Meanwhile, Zergia has unexpectedly flown back, noting that Mother Dragon hasn't woken up yet. He claims that only they can rescue Isti, and as Naseid looks at Zergia, he wonders if he could truly be so kind as to be the one to lure the evil king away. To be honest, this guy is really no better than a passing breeze. While distracting the evil king is important, traveling to and from the island to rescue Isti is a long journey. If the evil king returns halfway, everything will explode, and Zergia tells him that if he isn't willing to save their sister, he should just watch her die. He tries to trap Naseid with a moral dilemma, suggesting that if he is such a cowardly dragon beast who doesn't care about family affection, then he is truly pathetic. He rants about the lives of siblings and family, claiming that even if he were to kill Naseid right now, Lanuma wouldn't blame him too much for it. We see Zergia's eyes suddenly flash with a terrifying ferocity. He stares Naseid down, and the poisonous dragon lizard looks ready to spray filth at any given moment. It seems he is growing impatient, urging Naseid to hurry up and rescue Isti. Seeing Naseid looking slow and depressed, Zergia suddenly loses his patience entirely. Naseid frowns, looking at Zergia for a long moment, before finally revealing a small smile. He tells him he's right and agrees to do as he says, suggesting they go together to rescue Isti. The problem is that Isti currently cannot fly. If a real fight breaks out, Zergia has the advantage of flying through the air to suppress them with fire. Naseid realizes he can't really handle that right now, as he lacks the confidence to defeat Zergia in a direct confrontation. And so, he decides he has no choice but to temporarily obey. After a brief discussion regarding the details of the rescue mission, Naseid turns and runs off to the side. He carried his small sheepskin bag, the very same equipment he had scavenged back in the frozen cave. Inside were Naseid's various collections, just a messy assortment of small, random trinkets. Zergia watched Naseid wearing the backpack, a ridiculous item that, in his eyes, only humans would ever use. He let out a cold snort, his face twisted with a look of pure disdain. He then declared that he would go to lure the evil king away from the area. He told him to wait for the evil king to appear and then to start swimming immediately. He warned him not to try any tricks, otherwise, he shouldn't expect to stay alive for long. Naseid simply nodded, putting on a convincing show of total obedience. Deep down, he knew that resisting impulsively would achieve absolutely nothing at this stage. It would be useless, but if Naseid found the right opening, he would show his fangs without a moment's hesitation. Zergia chanted a spell under his breath and began to fly slowly up into the sky. To be perfectly honest, he was also taking a massive risk by doing this. However, to properly deal with Naseid and Isti, he had to lower his flight altitude bit by bit. Suddenly, the mud-covered surface of the swamp began to ripple and wave. We see a pair of scarlet eyes rising slowly from beneath the dark water. The creature stared intently at the black dragon, hatchling fluttering about in the sky above. The evil king let out a roar. He clearly hadn't expected these little insects to still have the nerve to provoke him. His thick tail suddenly tensed up as he began to swim rapidly in Zergia's direction. At that exact moment, Naseid dove deep into the murky waters of the swamp. This was the same place where he had previously devoured the iron crocodile in the river. It was then that he truly earned his right to live, moving through the water with the fluid grace of a fish and gliding forward at an incredible speed. As we follow him through the murky swamp, he finally nears the central ring island, only for the weeds beside him to suddenly stir. A blood-stained maw snapped open without warning. It was a swamp crocodile, lurking in the shadows for its next meal. He cursed his luck, knowing full well that he wasn't yet strong enough to face the evil king head-on. But as for this common predator, Naseid's eyes flashed with a sudden, fierce intensity as he dove deep into the thick mud. He vanished in an instant, leaving the confused crocodile to circle around, searching blindly for the prey that had just been right there. Suddenly, Naseid lunged from beneath the dark water, sinking his teeth deep into the crocodile's vulnerable underbelly. The creature didn't even have time to struggle before Naseid thrashed his head, tearing the beast completely in half. Other crocodiles had been closing in, hoping for a taste of him, but after seeing that display, they all wisely decided to keep their distance. Instead, once Naseid had passed, they turned their attention to a much easier dinner, their own fallen comrade. Naseid reached the shore without further trouble, while elsewhere, Zergia continued his ascent, even though the evil king remained grounded. However, the beast had a nasty trick of its own. It could spray a stream of toxic mucus high into the sky. To a black dragon hatchling like Zergia, that venom was a lethal threat he couldn't afford to ignore. The real danger wasn't just the poison itself, but the risk of those sharp toxins piercing right through his delicate wings. If that happened, he would fall just like Isti had, and even his own mother knew better than to pick a fight with these swamp dwellers. For a young dragon like him, falling into the muck meant facing the evil king on its own home turf. He would be killed and devoured in a matter of seconds, which was a fate he was understandably keen to avoid. Meanwhile, Naseid raced towards Circular Island, where Isti lay weak and fading from his injuries. The poor dragon had been badly poisoned by the evil king, and now, Naseid was his only hope for a way out. Naseid grabbed Isti's arms and pulled him close, wrapping them around his neck to carry the dragon to safety. "Hold on tight," Naseid warned him, "because if you fall into the swamp, it's over." "I don't care, it's fine," Isti replied in a weak, fading voice. Then, Naseid hoisted him onto his back and leaped back into the murky waters of the swamp. Not long after entering the water, however, Naseid realized that something was terribly wrong. Giant waves suddenly surged across the once tranquil swamp, and he poked his head above the surface to investigate. Looking toward the direction of the crashing waves, his pupils suddenly shrank in pure shock. We see Zergia flying straight toward them, with the evil king following right on his heels. Naseid cursed under his breath. He knew that idiot dragon was up to no good. Clearly, Zergia intended to use the evil king to ensure he and Isti remained in this swamp forever. Naseid hadn't been in the water long and was still far from the shore, especially considering the crocodile's speed. At this rate, they would definitely be caught before reaching safety, all thanks to Zergia's betrayal. Isti also noticed Zergia leading the beast toward them, finally realizing that his kin truly wanted them dead. "Die, all of you!" Zergia shrieked as he was the first to reach their position. He spat out a stream of corrosive, poisonous liquid, aiming directly at those below. Seeing the incoming attack, Naseid immediately dove deep beneath the surface of the water. The evil king also realized Naseid was trying to escape and decided to ignore Zergia in the sky. The massive beast submerged and immediately began its underwater pursuit of Naseid. Things were looking grim. Naseid could feel through the water that something was watching his every move. Reaching the opposite shore was now impossible, leaving him to maneuver desperately through the depths. The evil king's speed was terrifying, closing the gap in what felt like the blink of an eye. The distance between Naseid and Isti was now a mere 10 meters, and we see that the evil king was just about to reach them. Naseid summoned every ounce of his strength, his subjugating thorn flickering like a blurry mirage. He lunged forward suddenly, just as the evil king's massive maw swung open right behind them. A cold, putrid stench washed over the backs of the two dragons. The very breath of death felt incredibly imminent in that moment. Naseid pushed himself to the absolute limit, exploding forward with a desperate burst of speed. The moment he hit the shore, he used all 4 limbs to scramble frantically away from the water. With a sickening crack, the evil king's bloody, enormous mouth snapped shut. A small section of Naseid's dragon tail was caught in the crossfire. It was bitten clean off, an agonizing pain that would make anyone scream. Even so, Naseid didn't slow down. He accelerated, racing toward the center of the small circular island. However, as we soon realize, this ordeal was far from over. The evil king, realizing he had been outmaneuvered, flew into a rage and let out a deafening roar. Countless droplets of venom transformed into razor-sharp blades in the air. They flew straight toward Nasaid and Isti, who had only just escaped the water's edge. Nasaid had been watching the beast closely and was already prepared, pulling Isti into a protective embrace. He dove behind a giant rock just as the venom struck, corroding the stone into rows of deep pits. A constant hissing sound filled the air as foul, pungent white smoke rose from the melting stone. They had survived. After wandering so close to the edge of death, Nasaid could hardly process anything else. He collapsed into total exhaustion after finally escaping that terrible danger. His mind went completely blank as he looked at Isti, seeing that the little dragon was also paralyzed with fear. She lay on her side on the ground, trembling and frightened into a daze, unable to utter a single word. Nasaid muttered a quiet complaint, and in that moment, he looked down at his dragon tail, where the evil king had bitten off a piece. He suddenly snapped back to his senses and stood up violently. Fortunately, he had been prepared. Otherwise, to be perfectly honest, he really would have died at the hands of the evil king. Zalgar and Kozabil, you are murdering members of your own kind. Do you not fear the wrath of the mother dragon? Meanwhile, Zalgar had already retreated to the safety of the shore. He hadn't expected Nasaid and Isti to still be alive, but he told himself it didn't matter, as Isti's wings were already ruined. And since Nasaid has no wings and no ability to fly, they will surely die trapped out here. If you all die here, who will ever know what I did? Zalgar sneered. He would return to the dragon's lair and tell the mother dragon that Nasaid and Isti were simply incapable of surviving. He would claim they were attacked by the evil king and died in the swamp. After all, there would be no evidence left to prove otherwise. Chapter 15, The Dragon's Sister, Isti. Night soon fell, and we find Nasaid and Isti huddled beneath the giant rock in the center of the circular island. Isti lay on the ground, breathing heavily, proving that even dragons are susceptible to the fear of death. Why are you crying? You're being useless. Stop crying. From the very beginning, Isti had been whimpering, which was starting to get on Nasaid's nerves. How is this acting like a dragon? Why must you cry so much? She was being useless, he thought, but then she whimpered that her body hurt terribly. Isti no longer showed her usual arrogance. Isti's wings and body were covered in wounds, terrible, open gashes. They had already begun to rot and fester, a clear sign that the injuries were poisoned. Most were infected with the evil king's venomous saliva, though a significant portion of the damage had been caused by Zalgar's venomous dragon lizard, as we can see from the way Isti was gasping for air. Nasaid sighed. There was no other way, even if she did still insist on calling him her brother. He reached into the sheepskin bag he carried and pulled out a handful of plants. Nasaid also produced a medicine pouch. He enjoyed eating random things when bored, often consuming poisonous plants. Naturally, some of the plants he had gathered also possessed the power to detoxify and stimulate blood flow. Nasaid stuffed the herbs into his mouth, chewed them for a moment, and prepared to apply them to the poisoned wounds. The mixture could break down and absorb toxins, so he walked over to Isti and reached out his hand. He spat out the medicinal residue and began applying it directly onto Isti's injuries. Isti, suddenly realizing that Nasaid was touching her body, demanded to know what he was doing. She immediately tried to struggle, but he told her to be still, as he was only applying medicine. He shouted for her to calm down, and it was only then that Isti finally understood his intentions. Nasaid was indeed applying detoxifying plants to her wounds to save her life. Within the ancestral heritage of the dragon clan, there is knowledge regarding the names of certain plants. These 3 specific plants are known as black mudmint, snakeake grass, and cat-eye lily. And they are, in fact, plants with potent detoxifying effects. When she asked where he had found them, he simply replied that they were in his backpack. He explained that he used to spend his time searching for gems along the shore. He would find a few and collect them, though Nisar, of course, had no intention of revealing his secret base. It was a place where he also kept a great deal of herbs and food stored away. The herbs were now pressed against the wound, and some remained in Nisar's mouth. A lingering warmth remained from the process of chewing them down. Isti felt the wound, which had been burning with venom, begin to grow numb and cool. A slight tingling sensation followed, and a gentle heat began to spread from the injury. This was a sign of just how grave the toxicity had been. As the poison faded, the healing began. With her head bowed, Isti softly murmured a word of thanks. Nisar chuckled, telling her not to thank him just yet, as neither of them could leave. He joked that since there was no food, she would have to be his emergency rations. Isti was shocked. After all, eating one's own kind was strictly forbidden by the laws of the dragon clan. But seeing the mischievous look on Nisar's face, she realized he was only teasing her. With her cheeks puffed out in annoyance, she swung her dragon tail and struck Nisar in the abdomen. He grumbled about how difficult she was to please, a classic sibling dynamic, really. Nisar washed his hands and tossed the remaining herbs to Isti, telling her to apply them herself. He told her that if she wanted to use them, she was more than welcome to. He claimed he didn't need any help from a little fish like her. Despite his words, Isti couldn't help but feel a strange sense of loss in that moment. Meanwhile, Nisar peered over the edge of the giant rock to keep watch on their surroundings. The evil king and the blue family were nowhere to be seen, but deep down, he knew the truth. He was certain that the evil king had to be lurking somewhere nearby, watching and waiting. He also knew the blue family would eventually have to go out and hunt, driven by their lack of food. At first, they kept a close eye on them to prevent any escape, but after observing for a while, he felt sure Nissar and Isti were trapped in the swamp. And so, he finally decided to withdraw from the evil king's dangerous territory. Meanwhile, the evil king himself was indeed lurking in the dark waters beneath the circular island. Judging by the terrifying speed he had already displayed, escaping under normal circumstances would be nearly impossible. Nissar was wondering what on earth he was supposed to do when, suddenly, he heard a gurgling sound coming from Isti. He turned around and saw that, thanks to the medicine, she was feeling much better mentally. As it turned out, that peculiar sound was coming directly from Isti's empty stomach. She looked at him and admitted she was hungry, very hungry, in fact. She even suggested eating some mud and dirt just to fill the void, which was a bit desperate, to be honest. Nissar, however, wasn't hungry at all, having eaten and drunk his fill at the underground river before his swim. Isti realized this and asked if he had eaten the fish he caught back at the river. He jokingly asked if she expected him to throw it back up, but he was stunned by her reaction. It seemed she actually expected him to do it. After all, Krovik often returned from hunts with the prey in his stomach rather than on his back. He would then regurgitate the meal to feed the younger dragons, a charming family tradition. Thinking about it, we realize that dragons seem to have rather intense tastes when it comes to dining. With a bit of effort, Nissar managed to bring up the tail of a clawed crocodile. It was already half digested, which, let's be honest, was a fairly unpleasant sight to behold. That's all there is, he told her. I need to save my energy so we can actually escape. He suggested that if she was still hungry, she could go right ahead and eat the dirt herself. He refused to throw up anything else, even though Nissar still had plenty left in his stomach. He had regurgitated a little just now, and of course, the priority was making sure she didn't starve. Stingy, Isti muttered, before immediately swallowing the clawed crocodile tail whole. Finally, her hunger began to fade, and with food in her belly, her wounds would surely heal much faster. Suddenly, Isti looked at him and asked, "Are you going to abandon me?" Nissar asked if she knew how to swim. When she said no, he told her he'd definitely be leaving her behind. He knew he could swim, and if he ran alone, he actually stood a decent chance of surviving. Deep down, he felt that if he tried to take her with him, they would both be lost. Upon hearing Nissar's blunt response, poor Isti began to cry all over again. "Oh, all right, he sighed. "I'll take you with me when it's time to run." He told her he wanted to sleep and to stop whining, as it was becoming quite annoying, to be honest. Nissar chose to ignore Isti after that, lying directly on the ground to get some much-needed rest. We should remember that during their escape, Nissar had also been poisoned by the King of Hunger. Fortunately for him, his resistance to toxins was remarkably high. As long as he got enough sleep, his body would be able to recover from the poison quite rapidly. Before long, Nissar had fallen into a very deep and heavy sleep. He didn't even need to worry about any sneak attacks from the Blue family at this point. That leader of theirs was terrified of death, and this place was already far too dangerous for his liking. It was far too dangerous for them, especially at night, and the leader simply wasn't willing to risk coming back. Before long, Nissar's breathing became steady and calm. He fell into a deep sleep, and as Isti watched him, she began to move toward him with a certain shyness. Seeing that Nissar didn't react, she cautiously lay down right next to him. She drew even closer, and then, quite unexpectedly, something changed. We see that the weather the next day is actually quite good. Well, it's raining, at least. For a black dragon, this kind of humidity is the most comfortable environment imaginable. Nissar eventually woke up, slowly opening his sleepy eyes to the morning. He quickly discovered that Isti was curled up tightly in his arms. The rain was gently tapping against her scarlet scales as she slept. Now, Isti's neck is long and slender, and in the world of dragon aesthetics, that is a sign of true grace. Generally speaking, even though Isti is still just a hatchling, she would be considered a budding beauty by any dragon standards. But Nissar, to be perfectly honest, couldn't appreciate any of that. His tastes were a bit different. He preferred human women, specifically those with more generous curves. Fortunately, his body had already managed to flush out the toxins from his poisoned wound. Even the holes in his wings had begun to heal gradually as he rested. Brother, the little dragon muttered, clearly lost in whatever she was dreaming about. She was babbling quite actively, saying things that made absolutely no sense at all. We learned that the dragon mother gave Isti the power to distribute food because she was the smallest of the brood. Is she beautiful? Perhaps, but it didn't matter. Nissar simply gave his sister's dragon face a sharp tap with his claw. The wood elixir had done its work while they slept, connecting the two dragons in a deep, restorative slumber. Isti jumped at Nissar's slap, and upon seeing him, she suddenly remembered everything that had happened the day before. "It's a fine day today," Nissar remarked, a statement that left poor Isti feeling quite confused. She was still in a bit of a morning grump, honestly. What did it matter if the weather was good? We see they are still trapped, but when she looked at Nissar's solemn expression, she immediately swallowed her complaints. Good weather is actually terrible, he noted. And what, you might ask, is so terrible about it? Isti looked at Nisar's serious face and decided, for once, that she didn't dare be mischievous. It was raining, which meant the tide was going to rise, and rise quickly. The surface area of their little ring-shaped island was going to get smaller and smaller by the minute. At that moment, Isti suddenly took a look around at their surroundings. Nisar was right. The area of this tiny island truly did seem to be shrinking before their eyes. For the current situation of our two dragons, the rising tide was a grave threat. It was, in a very literal sense, a countdown for their lives. Yuan, under the Dragon Mother's deterrence, didn't dare set foot on land easily, at least for now. However, once the tide rises and the island is flooded or reduced to a certain size, the rules change. Yuan will attack without hesitation, and then, the two dragons will be nothing more than meat on a chopping block. So what should we do? Isti asked, her voice filled with growing anxiety. Without even realizing it, Isti had become completely dependent on Nisar for her survival. And in truth, Nisar had come there specifically to rescue her, which was no small task. As it turned out, he had already thought of a way for them to escape. Nisar immediately cast illusion light all around Isti, preparing his move. Suddenly, another Nisar appeared, a clever ability he had gained after consuming the illusory light unicorn. By refracting the light around him, he can create perfect mirages to deceive the eye. Nisar had tested this skill before, knowing he can only control the mirage within a 50-meter range. The distance from their ring-shaped island to the shore, however, is approximately 100 meters. The plan was to use a mirage to disguise Nisar's appearance first, acting as a distraction. The goal was to lure Yuan away in the completely opposite direction. And finally, with the path clear, the two of them could escape to the shore together. The problem, according to Nisar's calculations, was that at Yuan's speed, 50 meters wasn't much of a head start. By the time Yuan realizes it's a decoy, he would still have enough time to turn back and catch them. Since Isti cannot swim, Nisar would have to carry her on his back, which would significantly reduce his speed. In short, escape seemed incredibly difficult, but they were left with no other choice. Time was running out, and after hearing the plan, Isti looked quite dejected. Nisar, why don't you go first? She suggested. Taking me with you will only slow you down. Looking at Isti as she wore that pitiful expression, Nisar simply nodded in agreement. If that's the case, he replied calmly, then I will go first. Isti was absolutely stunned. She truly hadn't expected this guy to agree so easily. It seemed he didn't have the slightest bit of brotherly love for his sister, or so she thought. Originally, she had been genuinely worried about Nisar's safety, but this was a bit much. She had wanted him to go first, but suddenly, her mood shifted into a flash of anger. You bastard, she snapped. In that case, I'm going to insist on following you. Nisar's eyelid twitched at the sudden outburst. Of course, he muttered. Since ancient times, after all, the female mind has been notoriously difficult to predict. Nisar had actually believed for a moment that she possessed a spirit of self-sacrifice. As it turns out, she was just talking for the sake of talking. It was all for show. Fine then, he said, when I'm swimming through the water. You'd better move those big, thick legs of yours and kick to help us move. Don't you dare just sit on my back without moving a muscle. Like a big fat dragon. You're the big fat dragon, she retorted. Besides, she began to ramble about how giant dragons are naturally strong and majestic. Nisar quickly clamped his hand over Isti's mouth to silence her. To be honest, he really couldn't handle the constant chatter of this little female dragon. Once the two dragons were properly hidden, the plan finally went into motion. Nisar controlled an illusory light clone, sending it walking toward the shore. He then manipulated the illusion so that it appeared to be floating on the water's surface. Barely a second after the illusion touched the water, the entire swamp began to churn. The Crocodile King was indeed lurking beneath the surface, just as they suspected. Here comes the Crocodile King, he noted, as the clone feigned a look of pure terror. And then, the decoy fled in a hurry, leading the beast deep into the swamp. Then, the enormous and grotesque head of the Crocodile King appeared. It emerged from the water, swinging its giant tail, and gave chase with terrifying speed. Once the beast had pursued the decoy for about 50 meters, Nisar suddenly bolted from beneath the surrounding giant rocks. He dove into the swamp, swimming toward the opposite shore with every ounce of his strength. With a sickening crack, the Crocodile King opened its blood-stained maw and bit down on the illusion. The beast expected to crush its prey instantly, but to its surprise, the figure simply turned into a ray of light and vanished upon impact. The sound of splashing water echoed behind the creature, which we now know as Yuan. In that moment, Yuan turned his head abruptly and discovered the dragon beast carrying the wounded red dragon. They were making their way through the water, and after realizing he had been tricked, Yuan was absolutely infuriated. With a deafening roar, all the lesser monsters seemed to receive his orders and began swimming toward Nisar. Nisar cursed under his breath, wondering how the beast could summon so many minions at once. To make matters worse, he was only halfway to the safety of the riverbank. They were quickly surrounded by circles of claws, while Yuan himself was closing in at high speed. Suddenly, Isti, who was clinging to Nisar's back, opened her dragon maw and unleashed a hunting flame. These creatures instinctively feared the fire, and as the flames surged forward, they actually cleared a path for them. Seeing the opening Isti had created, Nisar rushed forward without a moment's delay. However, despite their best efforts, their escape had been significantly slowed down. When they were still 20 meters from the shore, Yuan finally caught up to them. Yuan opened his bloody mouth, ready to swallow the two small dragons in a single gulp. Isti felt an incomparable wave of fear, just as Nisar pulled her roughly from his back. "Are you really going to abandon me?" she wondered, as Nisar held Isti in his grip. He could have thrown her back at any moment to distract Yuan with Isti's presence and make his own escape. However, in the very next second, Nisar moved her away from his back. He threw Isti with all his might toward the safety of the riverbank. The little dragon flapped her wings twice, and suddenly, Isti was soaring through the air. She looked back at Nisar in disbelief, her eyes reflecting both him and the giant, abyssal maw about to swallow him whole. "Veer, catch," he seemed to signal, just as the beast swallowed Nisar with great joy. The creature sank directly into the water, passing through like a storm, leaving the swamp sands in a heavy silence. When Isti finally reacted, only ripples remained on the water's surface, surrounded by the constant movement of evil claws. "Brother," she cried out. And so we begin Chapter 17, Blood Vengeance is Inevitable. With a heavy gasp, Nisar's head suddenly poked out from the thick mud. He was now quite far from Yuan's territory. "Damn it," he muttered to himself. He had come incredibly close to death. In that moment, Nisar truly felt the weight of it. He was breaking into a cold sweat. After throwing Isti, it turns out he had used his trickery once again. He had twisted the nearest auxiliary claw into his own likeness, and then he dove into the swamp at high speed, completely masking his presence. He waited for Yuan to leave, only daring to crawl slowly out of the mud beneath the claws before shaking himself clean. Now out of danger, his eyes revealed a new ferocity. Whether as a human or a dragon, he followed his own path. Zorga wanted him dead, but as long as Nisar survived, he intended to make him pay with his life. He cared nothing for the laws of the dragon clan. To him, anyone who tried to kill him would not be allowed to live. And so, after finally reaching the shore, Nisar chose not to go looking for Isti. Instead, he concealed his breath and his form, gradually making his way toward the dragon's lair. Meanwhile, we find Zorga hunting for food, occasionally coming across small animals like rabbits who always relied on themselves. They used their size to their advantage in the jungle, moving nimbly from one side to the other. As it happened, Zorga could hardly catch any decent prey, which infuriated him, though the thought of getting rid of Isti and Nisar cheered him up. Knowing all the food hunted by the mother dragon could soon be his, he couldn't help but let out a smirk. He muttered about that despicable dragon beast who dared to stand above him, thinking that if Nisar had only obeyed from the start, things wouldn't have ended this way. And as for that useless Isti, he felt she didn't deserve to possess dragon blood at all. Just as he was speaking, a fat rabbit suddenly jumped out of the bushes and looked right at him. It turned and bolted. Zorga was surprised for a moment, but immediately flapped his wings and gave chase. What he failed to notice, however, was that the grass the rabbit stepped on left no trace whatsoever. This rabbit seemed to be deliberately leading Zorga along, reappearing every time Zorga thought he had lost it. After it vanished one last time, Zorga sniffed the air sharply. Detecting the smell of rotting fish nearby, he followed the scent until he reached the riverbank. There, lying on the shore, were several rotting and foul-smelling sawfish. The memory of the evil wolf had left a heavy psychological shadow on him. He scanned the surroundings, convincing himself that this was no longer the territory of that wicked wolf. It seemed to be a false alarm. He thanked the dragon god for the meal, showing a rather questionable level of intelligence. Zorga's concern was real, but he chose to ignore the fact that this was obviously an artificial pile of fish. And there, in the bushes right behind him, a dark red figure appeared, brushing softly against the leaves. Leaving behind only a whisper like a light breeze, his breath felt like a storm about to break. His dragon claws retracted, a feline preparation for a deadly strike as he gathered all his strength. Meanwhile, we see Zorga continuing to devour the rotting fish in great, greedy mouthfuls. The stench of the fish was so strong it masked Nisaid's draconic aura, even at such close range. Suddenly, Nisaid's body exploded forward, surging out from his hidden state of advancement. The black dragon, catching Zorga completely off guard once again, sank his teeth into his neck. Venomous teeth, no less, and Zorga could do nothing but let out a scream of pure agony. Because Nisaid had been hidden, Zorga never saw him coming, which increased the damage by 50%. This single bite tore great scales right off Zorga's neck as those sharp teeth sank deep into the flesh. He nearly tore away half the neck, slamming into Zorga until both dragons tumbled into the pond. A black dragon swims better than a red one, but they are both outclassed by Nisaid's talent and power. Besides, Zorga was already wounded and found it impossible to take flight after being dragged into the water. In this environment, his dragon wings didn't just lose their aerodynamic advantage. Instead, they became a heavy burden in the middle of a desperate underwater struggle. It was only in this moment that Zorga finally realized exactly who was attacking him. It was Nisaid, and in his mind, he cursed the beast, vowing to kill him for this insolence. Upon discovering his attacker was the humble dragon beast Nisaid, his rage suddenly spiked to new heights. He lashed out with his dragon claws, desperate to tear through Nisaid's skin and end the fight. Nisaid's bones had been strengthened, of course, but his flesh was already far tougher than any ordinary dragon. Much more fragile, indeed. Zorga's dragon claws tore through Nisaid's scales with relative ease, and they left behind deep scars that reached all the way to the bone. Nisaid lashed out with his own claws in a frantic counterattack, all while his giant mouth full of teeth. Never let go. Zorga realized that even as Nisaid was being torn apart again and again by his claws, he didn't back down. Instead, his desire to attack only grew more ferocious. The two remained entangled in the water. Zorga realized he was suffocating, and his neck was on the verge of snapping. In that moment, he finally calmed down, only to be consumed by the terrifying shadow of death. Stop, Nisaid, my neck. My neck is going to break. But Nisaid didn't let go. Quite the opposite. In fact, he began to shake his neck with even more force. He was tearing Zorga's wound open further. No, stop, the dragon pleaded. I beg of you. But Nisaid simply ignored Zorga's desperate pleas. He tore at him even more cruelly. Deep down, he knew this arrogant black dragon hatchling truly wanted him dead. Collapsing under the weight of his fear, Zorga cried out, "Let me go, please. I will submit to you. I only ask that you let me live. I'll do anything." Then, with a sickening crack of breaking bone, Nisaid bit straight through Zorga's neck. The dragon's entire head fell limply into the water. He was filled with utter disbelief. Nisaid had actually dared to kill him. In the final second of his life, his eyes were wide, filled with nothing but fear and supplication. With a triumphant sound, Nisaid dragged Zorga's corpse along, climbing clumsily back onto the shore. He panted heavily, his body standing tall despite being covered in deep gashes. We see that Zorga, like a cornered rat, had tried to fight back with everything he had. Among the chaos, his face was a chilling mask of desperation and primal instinct. But looking into his heart, we find no trace of compassion. His actions were so irrational and cruel that one has to wonder, where did his humanity go? From the very beginning, it was his own silence and hidden malice that brought him to this silent, watery end. We should remember that those dragon claws were meant to inflict a fatal blow upon Nisaid, a strike intended to end our protagonist's journey right then and there. It nearly cost the dragon beast his life, but that coward Zorga recoiled at the last second, using a life-or-death struggle to beg for mercy, while Nisaid embraced the resolve to die in battle. Because of this, the outcome was reversed. Nisaid sat on the shore, calming his emotions after killing a member of his own species, and his nominal brother, no less. Stunned for a long time, he sighed. The dragon customs had unknowingly amplified the ferocity that already existed in his original character. However, he is not an indecisive person. Now that it is done, he feels no regret. On the other hand, how should he dispose of this guy's corpse? Glub, glub, Nisaid was hungry. Chapter 18, Brothers for a Few Days, Purification Without Limits. Finally, Nisaid angrily lit a bonfire. He burned Zorga, for the corpse must not be discovered by Kalta. Otherwise, she would likely hunt Nisaid down. The reason for not eating him is that dragons are punished. This is clearly written in the laws of the dragons. The Dragon King is on his throne, and the heavens are watching. This isn't about internal moral restrictions. If the dragon god set laws, they surely have ways to investigate. After Nisaid killed his dragon beast brother, he remembered how Kalta threw the body into the swamp without eating it, proving that these laws are not to be violated. Nisaid, who has always been steeped in core values, truly cannot bring himself to swallow it. On the other hand, before figuring out the specific consequences of the dragon law, Nisaid will not take risks easily. But the body cannot be found by the dragon mother, so burning it is the only way. He definitely cannot just bury it. What if Kalta has magic to find young dragons? If the body were exhumed, the wounds would likely lead straight back to Nisaid. He thought to himself, "You and I were brothers. Though there were disputes and you were ruthless, I cannot be unjust. After burning you, I will throw your ashes into the swamp to sink in. Peace. In the next life, be a good dragon." Zorga was quite large, and it took Nisaid half a day to burn him into a handful of white ashes. He even carefully used leaves to make a box to store the ashes. Just as he was cleaning the remains into the box, he found something hard inside. Nisaid pulled it out and rinsed it with water, discovering it was a black golden stone. He hadn't expected that Zorga, that bastard, was actually a young dragon of some merit. However, when he grabbed the stone, it miraculously merged with his body. By fusing with the soul of the black dragon Zorga, Nisaid obtained a new ability, the Dragon's Eye. The Dragon's Eye can search for and identify information on all sorts of things, drawing from a knowledge network woven by two dragon gods and the god of wisdom. He wondered if this was the very ability Isti had mentioned. To test it, Nisaid pulled a blue gold stone from his bag and activated the Dragon's Eye. Immediately, a line of information appeared in his vision. Aquamarine, a blue gem that fetches a high price in human society and is often used in alchemy and crafting. Well, isn't this just like a game interface? As a gaming enthusiast, the appearance of this panel immediately sparked Nisaid's competitive nature. The dragon's eye functions much like an identification skill, and we can see how this will greatly enhance his future adventures. But that wasn't all. The map of mountains and seas within his body revealed its first page, depicting a glutton whose eyes glowed in the night. It was the essence of the northern mountains. The glutton desired to begin a purification process using the Suao stone for 5 years. 5 years of purification sounds like a long time, doesn't it? But if we think about it, many dragons sleep for years or even decades, shedding their skin and growing as they slumber. This process happens in a deep sleep. Naturally, Naseid wants to purify his body, but he can't do it here. He must return to his safe cave. He won't be going back to the dragon mother's lair. He might still carry the scent of blood, and if Kalta finds out he killed Zorga, she would likely kill him. So he scattered the ashes in the evil king's territory. He hoped to shift the blame to the evil king before returning to his own cave. Once there, he pulled out all the food he had stored. He prepared a mixed salad of meat, ginger fruits, and jungle plants, eating every bit. Since this deep sleep will last 5 years, he needs proper nutrition. Still not feeling full, Naseid ran to the pond near his cave. When he first moved in, he had cleverly fenced off a section of the river to keep fish. He occasionally feeds them swamp plants, and now he moves them to a corner of the cave. If he wakes up hungry during his evolution, he'll have a snack ready. Finally, he reinforced the cave entrance. Using a pitcher plant bag to carry loads of silt and gravel, he began to seal the entire doorway. He stacked layers of stones and filled the gaps with river mud, leaving only a few small holes for ventilation. He truly does not want to be disturbed. After finishing his chores, Naseid crawled onto his rock. This is the dragon bed he built for himself, and to be honest, it looks quite sturdy. The surface is covered in dried plants and the hides of magical beasts he's eaten, making it far more comfortable than a standard dragon's nest. Finally, Naseid activated the map to begin his evolution. The symbols on the map began to glow with a gray light, accompanied by a strange, childlike cry. A point of scarlet light merged with Naseid's body as he felt the heavy pull of exhaustion. What a sleep, he thought, as his eyes finally drifted shut. His eyes closed slowly, and not long after, he fell into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, 2 hours ago, it was believed he died in the jaws of the evil king, at least according to his brother. He had seemingly been swallowed whole, and the blood that flew through the air couldn't have been fake. Unsai sat on the ground and cried his heart out, realizing only now what he had lost. In his heart, even though he called Naseid an inferior dragon beast, Naseid was the only one who made him feel anything. Tartar Sis, on the other hand, treats him as nothing more than a formal obligation. There is almost no communication between them, and even less affection. In reality, the malice in her eyes is difficult to hide, even on a good day. Before, she even wanted to kill him, but Naseid had given him gems and occasionally told him funny jokes to cheer him up. Now, he finally understands his own feelings. He truly recognizes Naseid as his brother, but it's far too late. Naseid is dead. Unsai wiped the tears from his face, vowing to make Tarta find his brother's body. His dragon power has been damaged, and he needs a long rest to heal. The wine-soaked grass Naseid placed on his wound is working well, and though he is poisoned and weak, he can finally move. Now, he is heading back to the dragon's lair to ask Tarta to find Naseid's body for a proper burial. Chapter 19, Robbing the Iron Dragon Beast. The dragon mother, Tarta, directly rejected Isti's request. On the 3rd day after Isti returned to the lair, the dragon mother finally woke up from her slumber. Upon learning that Isti, Zeta, and Naseid had gone to hunt in the swamp privately, she was instantly enraged. Isti, however, was willing to face her anger to fix his mistake. He told her that since his brother Naseid was devoured by the evil king, he wondered if she could go there and collect his bones. Silence, you vile dragon beast, she snapped. She asked if he really thought she would bother fighting the evil king for such a creature. Tarta's copper eyes bore into Isti, creating a crushing pressure that left him breathless. Isti insisted that Naseid wasn't a vile beast, but his brother. Tarta was furious. This little dragon, only a month old, was actually disobeying her. She immediately pinned him to the ground. She threatened to kill him right then if he mentioned that vile beast again. To her, the important thing wasn't some bones, but the whereabouts of Zeta. Isti claimed he didn't know, saying that after Zeta attacked him and Naseid, he simply vanished. At the mention of Zeta, Isti's eyes filled with deep resentment. If it weren't for that guy, Naseid wouldn't have died at the hands of the evil king. But resentment aside, Isti wasn't lying. After returning to the lair, he found the mother still asleep. He had hidden in the darkness, preparing to ambush and kill Zeta the moment he returned. However, by the time the dragon mother woke up, Zeta was nowhere to be seen. Tarta was on the verge of an explosion after hearing this. You see, the reason she had this litter was because an adult red dragon had forced himself on her when she was young. She had no experience in raising children, so she hadn't applied tracking marks to the little dragons. Now that Zeta has been gone for days, she assumes he's been eaten by other beasts. Out of a litter of 4, 2 were mere dragon beasts, and now one of her true dragon cubs is missing. Looking at the red dragon in front of her, she is still beyond frustrated. She found him so disobedient that she truly wanted to bite him to death. Since he loved hunting so much, she told him that if he wanted to use force, he shouldn't depend on her to live. From now on, she wouldn't give him any food. He would have to find a way to survive here on his own. Immediately, the dragon mother directly expelled Isti from the nest and placed a barrier around it, preventing him from returning. And yet, even after being cast out, Isti refused to bow his head to the dragon mother. To him, his brother Naseid was no despicable dragon beast, quite the opposite, in fact. His eyes, filled with rage, pierced through the jungle as he looked toward the territory of the evil king. He vowed that one day he would skin that monster to honor his brother. He had no idea, of course, that Naseid was perfectly fine. Our protagonist was sleeping peacefully on his stone bed in the cave. Time passed quickly while Naseid slept, 5 years, to be exact. On this day, the sleeping Naseid finally stirred. He moved twice, his body trembled, and the dust covering him was shaken off. A dragon slowly emerged from his old skin. Naseid stretched, and we can hear his muscles and bones creaking. He had become an iron-devouring dragon beast. Naseid's current appearance has changed significantly. His face is fierce, and his mouth now extends all the way back to his ears. That mouth is filled with sharp, spiral teeth. His limbs are powerful, and his body now measures 4 meters in length. His abdomen, however, is the most distinct part of his new form. Deep within his soul, the red dragon's essence remained, though he was unaware of the changes occurring. He felt a strange rejection toward his previous state, as if his very being was being reshaped into something far more formidable. He was now a creature of legend, his name whispered in the shadows. With his head held high and his soul bound to this bizarre new body, he felt a surge of power, a revival of his inner strength that signaled the end of his long slumber. But beyond the physical changes, his scales now shimmered with the most brilliant colors, a velvet-like coat that hid a strength capable of crushing industrial instruments as if they were soft clay. This was the true result of his evolution. His iron-devouring aura evolved into the iron-devouring dragon beast form, granting him skills like iron-devouring eyes, ferocious beast bite, and bone-tail whip. Driven by a gluttonous fury, he rushed toward some rotten fish remains, ready to eat. Suddenly, the large mouth that had grown in the center of his chest emitted an immense sharpness, acting like a black hole. It pulled more than a ton of food into his gastric membrane. The sensation of hunger vanished instantly. However, in less than 3 seconds, his abdomen felt empty once again. He wondered what on earth was happening. Naseid had just eaten twice his own weight in food, yet at that moment, the bottomless stomach at his center opened wide again. This giant mouth in his abdomen can devour both matter and energy, though digesting high magic targets requires hibernation. To be perfectly honest, the things Naseid just ate weren't exactly nutritious. If there isn't enough magic in the food, it's much easier for him to feel hungry. He began to wonder what would happen if he consumed something with a more abundant source of magic. Thinking about this, Naseid touched his chin and turned his head to look at the skin he had shed. Since it came from a dragon beast, he figured it must contain some natural energy, right? At that moment, his eyes flickered twice. These iron-devouring eyes allow him to probe and gather information from any object he sees. They can even spot targets in a stealthy or hidden state. These eyes, from which nothing can escape, are an enhanced version of the dragon eye ability, and they were currently fixed on his own discarded skin. The eyes identified the object in his line of sight, the shed skin of the dragon beast. It was a rare material, discarded during his evolution, that possessed a very specific property. It could absorb surrounding magic and natural energy, making it a perfect base material for armor. Naseid originally wanted to eat it, but upon realizing its true value, he decided that devouring it would be a bit wasteful. After all, this was the very first skin from his own evolution, and he felt it was worth keeping. So, he stored it away in his spatial inventory. He then prepared to head out to find real food and, at the same time, test out his newfound power. In Chapter 20, we see that something is about to happen. The cave entrance had become hardened and sealed shut due to years of accumulation. It was as solid as a wall, but we must remember that Naseid has now evolved into a formidable iron-devouring dragon beast. His 5 dragon claws were now unusually sharp. Cutting through these rocks and mud was, for him, like slicing through soft tofu. With a gentle push, Naseid brought the entire wall crashing down, finally stepping out into the world once more. He eventually reached the riverbank. Upon seeing his own reflection in the water, he couldn't help but think, good heavens, what a monster. He actually startled himself for a moment, before realizing with a start that the creature in the water was, in fact, him. He frowned at the reflection. He couldn't help but wonder how he had turned into something so fierce. Was he even still a dragon? Furthermore, Naseid noticed that as soon as he approached the shore, every large fish in the river fled in terror. The smaller, weaker fish and shrimp didn't even get the chance to swim away. They simply floated belly up on the surface. It seemed he had literally scared them to death. At that moment, Naseid remembered something important. He possessed a specific talent, the iron-devouring aura. Any enemies caught within its range were in serious trouble. Their life force and magic power were continuously drained away just by being near him. Naseid took a moment to measure the range. The aura extended roughly 3 meters in diameter, centered entirely on himself. To be honest, this was quite similar to the legendary dragon presence exerted by giant dragons. The dragon presence of the great drakes is a similar aura-based ability that strikes fear into the hearts of others. In the logic of this world, such a presence performs a suppression check on any creature unfortunate enough to be affected by it. Once that suppression check fails, those affected fall into a state of pure terror or immediate flight. Furthermore, the presence of adult dragons doesn't just strike fear, it also comes with a suppression of one's attributes. In other words, the moment you enter the range of a dragon's presence, your very abilities begin to wither. However, the true dragon race can actually control this presence, a luxury Nisaid hoped to master. Nisaid tried to rein it in, as hunting with such an aura makes it far too easy to expose his position. To be honest, it would also cause a significant drop in his overall hunting success rate. After several attempts, Nisaid discovered that whenever a pang of hunger hit his stomach, the aura began to fluctuate. And so, he deduced that the aura was directly linked to his own sense of hunger. He adopted a rather strange posture, sitting with his legs crossed right there on the ground. In the cultivation novels of his previous life, this was how everyone focused their inner energy. Nisaid emptied his mind and began to shift his attention toward things other than his growling stomach. He found that he didn't feel quite as hungry, and simultaneously, the iron-devouring aura began to pull back. He simply couldn't toggle it as easily or freely as a true giant dragon could, of course. At most, he could contain it to a distance of about 10 centimeters from his body. However, this was enough, and with his aura now converged, Nisaid began to inspect his surroundings. He didn't have much strength yet, but we see that he soon discovered what this area had to offer. The clawed crocodiles living there are also considered magic beasts, which made them a perfect target. The natural energy within their bodies is far greater than that of any ordinary fish. After arriving, he noticed that the number of clawed crocodiles in this specific area was surprisingly low. As they became scarce, Nisaid used the optical illusions of his iron-devouring aura to hide his figure. He then slipped into the water, slowly approaching one of the 5-meter-long clawed crocodiles. When he was only a meter away, he suddenly lunged from the water, opening a blood-stained maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. He bit down directly on the neck of the clawed crocodile. The poor creature was bitten clean in half. Nisaid was stunned, as his original intention had only been to break the crocodile's bones. He certainly hadn't expected to bite the entire thing in two. His strength was immense, fueled by what we can only call a gluttonous bite. This activates a powerful biting force, where his sharp teeth gain armor-piercing and magic-piercing properties. It also adds law destruction, vitality absorption, and the draining of magical power. To be honest, it's incredibly impressive for this virtual world on the continent of Elvia. Warriors here equip heavy armor, and mages use magical shields to reduce incoming damage. Armor and magic penetration are the specific skills needed to shatter those very defenses. As for the destruction of laws, Nisaid isn't quite sure yet, but it sounds like something quite formidable. While he was lost in thought, the bloody maw on his chest directly absorbed the crocodile carcasses into his belly. This is very convenient, Nisaid thought, nodding to himself. Now, these clawed crocodiles, magic beasts though they may be, are as easy for him to kill as chickens or dogs, though he still isn't entirely sure of his own limits. He didn't know exactly how strong he had become, but for now, the priority was filling his stomach. He continued hunting until the last few crocodiles were devoured, and that was when he noticed something. A red figure was lying there, hidden in the grass. Isti watched the monster before him, his heart still heavy with lingering fears. Over these last 5 years, the dragon mother had completely stopped providing him with food. Every single piece of prey had to be captured by his own efforts. There were even times when the dragon mother grew interested in his catch. She would simply snatch his prey away, a beast mother in the purest sense, really. Consequently, he had grown to hate the dragon mother to his very core. A young dragon, barely 2 months old, was forced to find his own way to survive in the jungle due to her chronic neglect. During his hunts, we see he is only 3 units long, his small body covered in wounds and scars. But he survived, using any means necessary, even adopting hunting methods one would usually only see from humans. With this wisdom, he managed to hunt many clawed crocodiles right under the nose of the evil king. Methods he once considered beneath him were now his only choice if he wanted to stay alive. Today, just as he prepared to hunt another spirit crocodile, he noticed a new magic beast had invaded the area. Deep down, Isti felt that anyone invading this territory to steal food should be prepared to die. However, when that beast finally attacked, a single bite was enough to snap a crocodile clean in half. And that bloody, gaping maw on its chest was truly a horrifying sight to behold. The 3 bony spines at the end of its tail could easily pierce a crocodile's thick skull. What kind of monster was this? It let out a somber cry, sounding eerily like a human baby. It looked like a true demon in this dark, miasma-filled crocodile marsh. For a moment, Isti's resolved heart was gripped by a fresh sense of dread. And yet, he knew he wouldn't have many chances left to steal back his prey. On several occasions, Isti had even hunted his own kind right under the nose of the evil king. At this very moment, that same evil king was lurking in the mud, ready to strike. And indeed, just after the monster finished devouring another clawed crocodile, a massive figure rose from the muck and lunged forward. The evil king fell upon the magic beast with terrifying speed. It seems Nisat was so busy filling his stomach that he forgot this area had its own boss. The evil king moved with extreme precision, closing the distance before launching his final assault. By then, of course, it was already far too late to run. Nisat grit his teeth and, deciding to go for it, dove deep into the water. Not long after, Nisat resurfaced, but this time he didn't have any room to maneuver. The evil king, Flynn, simply opened his massive maw wide. With a mouth several meters long, he swallowed Nisat whole in a single, sickening gulp. Chapter 21. Fighting the Evil King once again. Is he dead? Isty's eyes remained fixed on the spot, watching the struggle between the two magic beasts. It should have been over, right? In this region, the Evil King is the only one who can truly stand up to the Dragon Mother. Aside from her, no one in the entire Flynn territory has the strength to defeat him. However, a second later, the Evil King thrashed out of the water, shaking his body violently. In that moment, Isty's eyes widened in pure shock. The monster that was supposed to have been swallowed alive was now clinging firmly to the Evil King's back. In that desperate instant, Nisat immediately began searching for a way to handle the situation. He dove into the water and used his phantom light ability to create a deceptive, illusory image of himself. He baited the Evil King's first strike, and then, taking advantage of the beast's presumed victory, he clung to its back and dug his sharp claws deep into its flesh. He lashed himself firmly onto the Evil King's spine, refusing to let go. Now, although the Evil King was fierce and powerful, his limbs were quite short. His mouth was narrow and long, making it impossible for him to attack anything on his own back. Nisat took advantage of this exact weakness, digging his limbs firmly into the king's hide. Well, the Evil King let out a roar. Seeing that shaking his body wouldn't dislodge Nisat, he prepared to perform a deadly roll. He took Nisat with him and began rolling through the mud at an extreme speed. At such a velocity, even a slight brush against a hard rock would tear him right off the king's back. It would leave a deep wound that would surely reach the bone. Even more dangerous was the fact that once Nisat was thrown off, the Evil King would be able to launch a direct, lethal attack. In that moment, he wouldn't even have a place to be buried. To avoid being tossed aside, Nisat wrapped his tail around the beast for extra leverage. The bony spines of his three tails stabbed fiercely into the Evil King's own tail. It was brutal. Nisat's body was marked with many terrifying wounds from the Evil King's rolling. Immediately after, this pain awakened Nisat's own ferocity as he clung to the beast's back. The dragonkin opened his blood-stained maw right over the king's head. His ferocious bites, imbued with armor-piercing attributes, easily tore through the Evil King's tough, spiritual armor. How could this even be possible? Isty could hardly believe what he was seeing. He was utterly shaken, driven by the desperate need to avenge his brother. He attempted to strike the Evil King several times, but to no avail. Normally, only a dragon lizard with armor-piercing abilities could inflict even a slight amount of damage on the Evil King. But this magical beast before us actually tore through the king's spiritual armor and continued to gnaw at his very flesh. This terrifying ferocity made even Onlon, a man who would do anything to survive, feel a sudden chill down his spine. On the other hand, Nisat's ferocious bites could devour an opponent's life force, especially with Toadi's halo at full power. Therefore, even though Nisat was at an absolute disadvantage in terms of strength, health, and armor, the Evil King's violent, deadly rolling began to grow slower and slower. And finally, it stopped altogether. Well, even the fierce and resilient Silk Monkey has his limits. He had grown weak. Having fought this far, Nisat was still firmly planted on the Evil King's back. By tearing a hole in the flesh and blood a meter wide, we could say he had truly reached the king. The Evil King finally perished after one last, desperate struggle. It was brutal. The ferocious beast blood in Nisat's body pulsed constantly as he stood atop the king's mangled remains. His own body was covered in agonizing, raw wounds. Yet his ferocity did not fade, and he couldn't help but let out a sound. A chilling cry that echoed through the entirety of the Ezelin marsh. Meanwhile, Isty remained hidden deep within the bushes. He didn't move a muscle, terrified of being discovered and hunted by this creature. After all, the king of the marsh was a beast that could rival the Dragon Mother herself, especially considering the current stage of the Dragon Mother's life. She is likely a young dragon on the very verge of reaching adulthood. Therefore, we can assume the strength level of this evil Ezelin king was roughly equivalent to that of a young member of the dragon race. Nisat only managed to defeat him by clinging desperately to the king's back. But don't go thinking our toady dragon race is just some mindless, brute force monster. Nisat is quite the tactical player as well, you see. While other dragon races might be foolish enough to simply charge and attack directly, relying purely on overwhelming their enemies with raw power. In a situation like this, who would have ever imagined that he would focus his entire assault on the evil king's back? It was a display of sheer, invincible skill, a masterstroke in the heat of battle. However, what Nisat didn't realize was that his piercing howl in that moment had reached the ears of the Dragon Mother deep within her lair. The sleeping dragon mother slowly opened her bronze-colored eyes. To a territorial black dragon, such a disturbance is more than just noise. It is a direct provocation. She looked toward the source of the sound, the territory of the auxiliary demon king. She wondered if an equally powerful magical beast had arrived to challenge the king. Could it be another giant dragon? Karta reflected briefly before emerging from the cave. She took flight in that direction, thinking that if two beasts fought to the death, she could finish off the survivor. She was thinking of that tough nut to crack, the demon king himself. In that moment, the entire Fuline swamp would finally become her territory. Isti looked at the magical beast standing right before him, his body trembling slightly. This monster has 5 mouths, one on its head and another right on its chest. And on the 3 bony spines of its tail, there are 3 more mouths waiting. These mouths act like terrifying tentacles, reaching out for their prey. They continuously tear at the demon king's flesh, devouring it in massive bites. And what is even more terrifying is that this fellow's stomach is like a bottomless pit. A dragon can only eat 80% of its own volume in one sitting, while this creature, well, he has already eaten twice his own volume and shows no signs of stopping. This frantic scene made him hesitate, just as he found he could no longer suppress his fear. As he prepared to turn and flee, an enormous black shadow suddenly appeared in the sky. Isti looked up and saw her, Karta, the dragon mother he hated so much. The dragon mother slowly retracted her massive wings and landed upon the shore. She stood there, watching the magical beast that simply refused to stop eating. The body of this magical beast is strange and twisted, to say the very least. And in the places not covered by raw flesh and blood, one can see reddish-black spiritual scales and dark golden patterns. In the night, its 2 greenish-red eyes spin incessantly, filled with madness and greed. Naysade doesn't have those 3 bony spines with mouths, nor that voracious one on his chest, which, to be honest, is quite terrifying. She also discovered Isti, who was hiding nearby in the tall grass. Isti frowned, his yellow eyes glowing with a faint, sharp light. He used his dragon eye to scan the monster's power, revealing it to be at the black iron level. Level 13 dragon beast, level 10, and a level 3 iron spoil dragon race. The creature standing before her was indeed a dragon beast, a truly grim sight to behold. We see the markers of a dragon war, Naysade and Krovik. Level 13 dragon beast, level 10, and a level 3 iron spoil dragon race. This information flashed through the dragon mother's mind, a gift, in fact, from her dragon eye. It doesn't just identify objects. As a dragon grows older, they gain more and more abundant knowledge. These are the dragon legacies. Some elders who receive this heritage gain significant enhancements. For instance, the dragon eye's range of information becomes increasingly vast over time. Take Kurtar, for example. When she entered her dragon youth, she received her own draconic inheritance. This inheritance greatly improved the natural abilities of her dragon eye. She can now roughly categorize the abilities of any creature she detects based on their specific level. This ranking system follows a very systematic standard of division. Levels range from 1 to 100, with a new tier every 10 levels, starting with the ordinary rank. Then come black iron, adamantine, and silver, followed by gold, epic, and legend, reaching up to holy domain, demigod, and god. Each level is a significant threshold, and Kurtar's own level currently sits at 26. The Black Dragon Kurtar, Adamantine Realm level 27, with a race level of 27. Then we have the Evil King Flynn, Adamantine Realm level 29, and the Flynn Algae at level 20. The Evil King of the Malignant Algae himself sits at level 9. Of course, a simple numerical level isn't always the best indicator of power. It isn't the only decisive factor. Take Kurtar's level, for example. It is lower than the Evil King's, but because a Black Dragon's growth attributes are so much higher, she holds the advantage. So, if they were on land in a one-on-one fight, the Evil King still wouldn't be able to defeat Kurtar. And yet, here is a level 13 dragon beast standing before her that could easily kill that same Evil King. Kurtar could hardly believe her eyes. Besides, this dragon beast looked quite strange, even though Nashad's appearance has changed significantly. But as her own offspring, she could still sense a deep, lingering connection between them. What is it about this dragon beast? She felt a predestined bond pulling at her. You are Nashad, she whispered. Isti, who was originally tense while watching the dragon mother and the monster, heard Kurtar speak. Hearing Nashad's name, Isti suddenly looked at the monster with a face full of pure astonishment. Could it be him, her brother? She wondered why on earth he had turned into this. At that moment, Nashad heard someone calling out his name. Only then did he slowly, almost mechanically, turn his head toward them. It's the Tao Tai's nature, you see. Once a Tao Tai begins to feast, there is a high probability of falling into a dark, negative state of pure gluttony. His younger sister, Isti, was standing right there beside him, and Kurtar was currently under the threat of being captured at any second. He looked as though he were ready to launch a devastating attack at any moment. We see a young, giant dragon here, one possessing both considerable wisdom and strength. Normally, Nashad would be no match for Kurtar, as dragons have the unique ability to absorb all kinds of strange magic. It is a completely different situation from the Evil King Flynn, who relied purely on brute force. Nashad didn't respond. He simply stood there, staring intently at the dragon mother, Kurtar. Kurtar noticed his silence and prepared herself to put him to the test. The reason she hesitated to launch a direct attack was that, deep down, she already sensed an unsettling answer. After all, a level 13 dragon beast, no matter how strong it might be, shouldn't pose a threat. It should be impossible for such a creature to compete with a level 26 black dragon. To settle the matter, the black dragon let out a bone-chilling, earth-shattering roar. This dragon roar carried with it a powerful, overwhelming aura of pure draconic deterrence. Every ordinary bird within a 1-kilometer radius was affected instantly. They all fell unconscious, and even Nashad found himself dazed by the sheer force of the sound. If he hadn't evolved into a dragon species and was still just an ordinary beast, things would be different. Under such bloodline suppression, he would have likely submitted on the spot, trembling in fear. Kurtar's strength is utterly crushing, enough to make any creature of the same level fall into total despair. And yet, we see Nashad move slightly atop the corpse of the evil king. The terrifying creature didn't show even the slightest hint of weakness. His ferocity as a beast was on full display, with a momentum that rivaled the dragon's own power. Isti watched Nashad in complete disbelief. He actually hadn't backed down at all. One has to wonder if Nashad, as our protagonist, has a few more tricks up his sleeve. The question remains, can he truly face off against this powerful black dragon? Yes, indeed. There is still one final trick we can rely on. And what might that be? It is Nashad's ultimate ace in the hole. Nashad lets out a thunderous eagle cry, spewing a powerful, toxic breath directly from his mouth. He exhales a breath of poisonous slime, with a toxicity level proportional to his own poison resistance. This is the very ability he obtained after devouring the evil king. And so, the suspicions growing in the dragon mother's heart are further confirmed. Even though Nashad is at a lower level, Kurtar doesn't dare to be careless and immediately invokes her dragon magic. She deploys a protective shield across the surface of her massive body. That incomparably powerful breath slams into the shield without a shred of mercy. But, to be honest, it fails to inflict any real or effective damage. Suddenly, we hear Nashad shout to run fast before he dives headfirst into the swamp. What exactly is happening here? What kind of spell could that possibly be? Kurtar, of course, is completely unfamiliar with Nashad's rather unique tactical strategies. She assumed it was some sort of sneak attack and immediately began scanning her surroundings with caution. After a moment of silence, the dragon mother suddenly realized that the boy might actually be trying to escape. She flew quickly into the sky outside the cave, frantically breathing fire down toward the swamp. However, there wasn't even a hint of movement within the murky waters. It seems our friend has indeed escaped, apparently possessing the ability to completely hide his aura. Kurtar tried several different types of draconic scouting magic in quick succession, hoping to find him. She was unable to find Nashad anywhere and was eventually forced to land, feeling utterly powerless. It seems he was chosen by Tiamat herself, the mother of all evil dragons. He received her blessing and was transformed into an evil dragon, the dragon god of the entire clan. There are two in total, the platinum dragon Bahamut and the mother of evil dragons. After the fall of these two dragon gods, the faith of the dragon clan was also split into two distinct parts. One side belongs to the camp of goodness and legitimacy, consisting of crystal, gold, silver, and bronze dragons. And the other part, as we might expect, belongs to the chaotic and evil camp. This group mainly includes 5-color dragons, undead dragons, ghost sea dragons, and dragons of calamity. And Tiamat's reward is not only genuine, but quite significant. For those dragons possessing a pure lineage, Tiamat sometimes acts on a sudden whim. She chooses to bestow her blessing upon the most fierce and wicked of dragon beasts. And these dragon beasts, to be perfectly honest, are truly terrifying creatures. They will devour their own kind, and their dark thoughts grow endlessly until they become bloodthirsty monsters. Are you suggesting that Tiamat chose him, but he has somehow swallowed her influence? How foolish. Are you really questioning the gifts of the dragon god? Kurtar shouted out loud in a fit of rage. Even she, it seems, was shaken. She didn't want to mention the name of this evil dragon mother more than was strictly necessary. If Nashad truly was chosen by Tiamat, the best course of action would be to stop searching for him immediately. Otherwise, once he holds a grudge against you, he will inevitably seek his retaliation sooner or later. Evidently, the dragon mother already considers Nashad to be a dragon descendant blessed by Tiamat. At this point, she simply doesn't want to be involved in this matter anymore. Deep down, she has already made her decision. She will soon leave the Fuline swamp to find a new territory far away. As for Isti, she no longer cares about this young dragon who has already been abandoned. He can fend for himself. After that, Kurtar returned to her nest and hurriedly gathered her belongings. Then she left the swamp behind. Meanwhile, standing nearby, Isti felt his heart grow heavy with conflicting emotions. He hasn't forgotten his brother, and now that he knows he is still alive, he feels a flicker of happiness. But his brother has become that kind of monster, and Isti blames himself for everything. No matter what, he told himself he had to find a way to set him free. But it seemed impossible, as Isti firmly believes that Nashad's soul was stripped away by the evil dragon mother. And yet, this brother is the only family he has left in this life. He cannot give up easily, so he decided that one day, he will rescue his brother from Tiamat's grasp. Chapter 23. The Roasted Whole Lamb. Fortunately, he moved quickly. Nashad ran out of the swamp and returned to his cave without stopping once. He immediately packed his things to flee, knowing he could no longer stay in this swamp. Inside the cave, he found a map belonging to a long-dead treasure hunter. According to the icons on the parchment, if he travels toward the northeast, there is a human village. He could go there first to try his luck. To be honest, even though he is now a dragon beast, he still hopes to be human again in his next life. Then he slung a pitcher plant backpack over his shoulder, filled with food and the trinkets he had collected. Plants, gems, fruits, and even his leather leggings were tucked away inside. On the road, he remained cautious, but as it turned out, the dragon mother's pursuit never actually came. After 5 days of trekking, we see the miasma finally beginning to thin out. He gradually left his birthplace behind, and more wild beasts began to appear along the path. And occasionally, he was able to catch a small animal or two for himself. To kill time, whenever he encountered plants, regardless of whether they were poisonous, he would take a bite. Even though he already possessed the piercing steel eye, which could scan the plants for information, he felt it was much more convenient to simply eat them directly. Swallowing blood wolf dragon grass. Short-term self-healing rate increased by 20. Swallowing poisonous vine with flower thorns. Poison resistance increases for 1 day. While eating fruit, Nashad checked the first page of the Book of Mountains and Seas, Essence. The piercing steel eye has now been fully illuminated. By now, he has acquired a great many skills and talents. And he has also evolved into a species known as the piercing steel eye dragon. In the legacy of the giant dragon race, there are dragon lizards and dragon power. The poisonous breath Nashad obtained from the evil serpent is essentially the same thing. And his piercing steel eye aura is similar to dragon power, with the effect of absorbing vitality and magic. If he could only grow a pair of wings, anyone who saw him would surely think he was a giant dragon, rather than a mere dragon beast. When he turned to the second page of the book, he found it was completely blank. This requires him to complete the evolution path himself, so he decided to first seek out winged exotic beasts to select his next form. And then, he used the piercing steel eye to check his current status. Nashade Krovik, level 15 dragon beast, level 10 piercing steel eye, level 5. As Nashade gazed at the information floating before him, he recalled that this was exactly like a game's status panel. In this world, we see that the combat power system is divided into 100 distinct levels. From lowest to highest, they are ordinary, black iron, and bronze. Then comes silver, gold, epic, legend, sacred domain, and demigod. And finally God. With every promotion comes a chance to advance, though advancement often requires a significant breakthrough. There are many ways to break through: mastering martial arts, absorbing magic power, or simply swallowing things. Usually, a special resource is required. Generally speaking, one does not simply change their own race or occupation. If you are born a black dragon, you will always be a black dragon, unless you somehow evolve into an ancestral dragon. Otherwise, the status panel will always list you as such, and for Nashade, he was still a dragon beast. He had reached the growth limit of level 10 and chose to evolve, so here we are now. He has his original level 10 profession plus a level 5 profession for growth. It is, quite simply, an evolution. Nashade's combat power has increased almost exponentially. One could even say that every evolutionary leap is an opportunity to change one's destiny and defy the heavens themselves. When he first evolved, Nashade was level 13, but he has already reached level 15, likely thanks to the meat provided by the evil serpent. If meat contains a high concentration of life force, for Nashade, it is essentially a guaranteed experience pack. After a brief reflection, Nashade felt there was no immediate rush to decide on his next evolutionary path. He wants to devour as much food as possible and reach level 20 quickly, and while he was busy thinking, Nashade discovered traces of other creatures nearby, noting the diagonal footprints left in the surface of the mud. Having walked for several days, Nashade finally left the Fuline swamp behind and entered the territory of the human kingdom. Nashade was naturally quite cautious. If a knight of the kingdom captured him and harvested him for materials, it wouldn't end well, so he hid in the forest and spotted a village in the distance. Black smoke was rising from the site, as if something had recently burned. Nashade reflected for a moment, then began walking in that direction. Following the trail of black smoke, he eventually arrived at a human settlement. These humans have a Western appearance, with brown hair and a relatively tall stature. Of course, compared to Nashade, a dragon beast standing 4 meters tall, everyone looks quite short. He could hear them chatting incessantly, but to be honest, Nashade couldn't understand a single word. He simply didn't know the common language of the human kingdom. However, we see that this group of people was quite excited, enthusiastically surrounding a large bonfire. Are they having a party? It seems something is being roasted over the flames. A whole roasted lamb, perhaps? Nashade caught the unmistakable scent of meat. He took a quick look at the status panels of these people, mere passing villagers. Level 3 human peasants, essentially, cannon fodder. Nayshade silently gave his own evaluation of these characters. These are pure combat power trash, with the highest ranking individual here being a level 7 soldier. Although there appears to be only an 8-level difference between them and Nayshade, even if they were at the same level, things would be different. The disparity in combat power between different species is immense, largely because their attribute growth histories are so distinct. For instance, a newborn dragon is only level 1. But even if you give a level 10 farmer a rake, he wouldn't necessarily be able to defeat that young dragon. So, if these militias were to fight Nayshade, the reality is simple. The more of them that come, the more of them will die. On the other hand, we see that things aren't quite what Nayshade thinks. The villagers aren't exactly throwing a party here. They were shouting about how evil this witch was. This woman they claimed brought nothing but disaster. Everything is her fault, they cried. My sow won't give birth, and my house has collapsed. I broke my leg, another yelled, and the black bread she made for my wife is as hard as a stone. What is happening here? To them, this was absolutely a case of black magic. It's all her fault, one woman wailed, claiming her husband had run off with other men. She was crying her eyes out, while all the villagers vented their endless dissatisfaction. Ever since they caught this person, there hasn't been a single day of peace in the entire village. But now, they had finally captured the witch and were preparing to burn her at the stake. We see Lilith tied to the pyre, her eyes dull and completely numb to the world. Below her were nothing but malicious glares, but she had already grown accustomed to this treatment. Since the day she was born, she had supposedly been bringing disaster to everyone around her. She was merely passing through the village of the curse, and now, everything had gone dark. The villagers had arrested her, quite actively, in fact, yet now they blamed her for the very disasters they claimed she brought. Chapter 24, Lilith the Witch and the Whole Roasted Lamb. Nayshade, meanwhile, was thinking about his stomach. If he didn't eat now, he might not get another chance. He let out a roar at the villagers, preparing to scare them off so he could enjoy that roasted lamb all by himself. The villagers, of course, couldn't understand a single thing Nayshade was trying to communicate. To their ears, they could only hear cries that sounded strangely similar to a wailing baby. But when they saw Nayshade's grotesque face, his 4-meter-tall frame, and the bloody mouth on his chest, they were chilled to the bone. Monster, help! What a hideous monster! They screamed in terror. Everyone run. The crowd descended into total chaos, fleeing in a blind panic. He watched them go with a chuckle. They were running, actually running away. Now that they were gone, that entire roasted lamb would be his and his alone. Dozens of villagers continued to scramble away, gripped by absolute dread. In no time at all, the entire clearing was completely deserted. Nayshade strutted toward the bonfire, licking his lips in anticipation. Then he saw the girl. Her clothes were in tatters, and her exposed skin was covered in scars. She had pale skin, a slender frame, and short black-purple hair framing a tender face. At that moment, a sudden realization hit Nayshade. Damn it, that isn't a roasted lamb at all. These people are roasting a human being. It looked exactly like those medieval scenes from his previous life where villagers burned witches at the stake. One couldn't exactly call the scene friendly or pleasant. It was, to be honest, quite pitiful. But as the girl with the purple eyes looked up at Nayshade, she didn't scream at all. Nayshade's expression remained strangely calm as he watched her. He stared at her, realizing her eyes were filled with a hollow numbness, lacking any of the innocence typical of her age. What could have happened? Why on earth were these people trying to burn a child? Lord Nayshade couldn't bear to see such a small girl suffer, and he immediately reached out with his claws. He prepared himself to carefully untie the ropes binding the girl. But just as his hand was about to reach her, something unexpected happened. A sudden burst within his body. His gluttony skill inadvertently began to absorb a strange type of energy. This energy was the very darkness emanating from the young girl's body. And here we see the omens begin. After checking the girl's status panel, Nayshade was genuinely surprised. Her name was Lily, a level 6 female demon, only 6 years old. It turns out she is a witch, a specific human origin on the continent of Aria, possessing incredibly strong magical attributes. With a natural affinity for black magic, she is, to be honest, a rather powerful human template. However, this kind of witch is hardly considered a hero by those who follow the path of goodness. Naturally, all units aligned with justice have a poor opinion of witches, mostly because they struggle to control their power. It is far too easy for them to cause massive destruction without even meaning to. Throughout the history of the game, they have always been seen as an ominous and dangerous presence. Just as he was reflecting on this, a wooden javelin flew through the air and bounced harmlessly off Nayshade's tough scales. Nayshade looked up and saw that the villagers who had fled in terror just moments ago had already returned. They were armed with torches and pitchforks, which, in any normal situation, would have seemed like a bit of a joke. He wondered if they really intended to use those against him, or if they simply thought he hadn't eaten enough yet. He told himself they were simply coming to their deaths as he slowly licked his lips in anticipation. "We can't let the witch escape," they shouted. "If she leaves alive, she will definitely take her revenge on us. Kill this monster too." The villagers chattered incessantly, but Nayshade didn't understand a single word of the human language. To him, these humans were nothing more than tiny, insignificant ants. They had been incredibly noisy from the very start, and every now and then, they grew even bolder. They would throw a few more wooden javelins or fire a couple of arrows, hoping, perhaps, for a miracle. Oh, you truly are courting death, he thought as he watched them approach. He told himself they couldn't blame him for what came next, and then, Nesad exhaled a lethal, poisonous breath. The mist solidified in the air, transforming into hundreds of razor-sharp, poisonous knives. As the blades struck the villagers, they fell all at once, looking very much like a field of harvested wheat. Cries for help rang out as the realization set in that they had been poisoned. This was a deadly toxin that even magical beasts of the same rank would struggle to endure. For these ordinary humans, it was quite simple. Even a slight graze meant certain death. The force of the breath was so great that some villagers were even cut clean in half by the impact. Behind the fallen crowd, the remaining villagers, those lucky enough not to be hit immediately, stood frozen. They began to flee in a frantic panic, though originally he had intended to let them live. But unexpectedly, they had returned with no regard for their own lives, foolishly intent on killing him. His philosophy was simple: if you don't act, but once you do, you must be absolutely ruthless. And so, Nesad shifted his form, dropping down to run on all fours. He pursued every single fleeing villager, unleashing his deadly poisonous breath upon them one by one. In the end, not a single one of these people managed to escape from Nesad's venomous clutches. Deep down, he only hoped that killing these villagers wouldn't attract the attention of powerful adventurers. However, even if an investigation were launched at that moment, it wouldn't be possible to find him. It simply wouldn't be possible to trace the events back to Nesad, no matter how hard they tried. Why, you ask? Because deadly poisonous breath is famously a skill belonging to the corrupt evil king. What could that possibly have to do with a mere dragon beast like him? Nothing at all, naturally. He told himself that the corrupt evil king would simply have to take the blame for this one. After that, we see him turn his gaze toward the young sorceress. This sorceress was truly interesting, and he knew that if he left her here, she would likely be forced to fend for herself. He decided it would be better to take her back and play with her slowly, perhaps even seeing if she could be cultivated. Could she become his own assistant? To survive in Artrea, he knew it was necessary to build a force of his own. And so, Nesad wrapped Lilith up with his tail, and, with a single powerful leap, he vanished into the jungle. After fleeing the village, Nesad dragged Lilith to a secluded cave. From beginning to end, Lilith showed no expression of fear. Her face remained strangely numb. To be honest, she didn't seem to care about any of this. At the moment of her birth, her mother had died during labor. She had endured her father's blows and insults until she was 8 years old, when he prepared to abuse her once again. Something awakened within her as she huddled in the corner while her father approached. The entire house suddenly collapsed. Lilith suffered only minor scratches, while her father was crushed to death in the ruins. However, the death of her father did not bring her a bright future, far from it. Everyone detested her, and everyone considered her to be a terrible omen. Even if there were kind people willing to approach her, it never lasted long. In the end, because of these people, Lilith began a life of wandering aimlessly from place to place. Until a few days ago, she wandered to Ijan village, a place of poor mountains and harsh conditions. Near the waters, due to the extreme poverty, many villagers from the Lin Mansion marsh would risk entering the swamp to search for plants that could be used as crafting materials and food, which explains why most of the people here are so brave and, frankly, quite barbaric. And they also happen to dabble in smuggling and human trafficking. When they first saw Lilith, they captured her with the sole intent of selling her off. However, it wasn't long before Lilith's legendary bad luck began to rub off on them. After several people met their ends, the villagers finally realized the truth. They decided there was a serious problem with Lilith and resolved to burn her to death. Regarding all of this, Lilith had long since become completely numb. Perhaps death would be a release for her, or so she told herself. Even now, captured by this terrifying monster, she didn't care if she was swallowed whole. This world simply does not love her. Chapter 25, Barbecue. Great banana, your name truly is quite wonderful. As Nesad hummed a little tune, he popped a fruit resembling a banana into his mouth. The great mimic banana, non-toxic, edible, and possessing a slightly sweet flavor. It is a specific variety of fruit that grows deep within the swamp. Rich in faint dark energy, its taste is, to be honest, very strange. Lilith watched Nesad while she sat there, hugging her legs tightly. This monster was very odd. After bringing her to the cave, he hadn't tried to eat her. Instead, he tossed a piece of fruit in front of her and made an incomprehensible sound. Later, she vaguely realized this might be a song, sung in the monster's howling voice. It sounds terrible, like a fingernail sliding across a stone slab, but it is strangely magical. After observing him carefully, she discovered that beyond his grotesque form, this monster was full of oddities. We see that this fellow stands on 2 legs and carries an enormous vegetable backpack on his back. He even pulled a flint from that same backpack and began to light a fire. Lilith found herself distracted by this monster's behavior, and immediately, she felt a little less sad. Her stomach growled. Lilith felt the pangs of hunger and hesitated for just a moment. She picked up the enormous black banana, which was half her height, and took a bite. Nesad looked on, utterly bewildered. Had this silly girl never eaten a banana before? Why hadn't she even removed the peel? She was simply gnawing on the whole thing. Only then did he realize that people in this world hadn't necessarily tasted the great swamp banana, though she could apparently eat iron dragon beasts. Anything would do, really. So he didn't peel it and just tossed it into his mouth to chew, the idiot. Nesad left the fire he was working on and walked toward Lilith, who instinctively backed away in fear. Now that she wasn't quite so desperate, she found she still had a little fear of dying while looking at this magical beast. To be honest, he was terrifying, especially that bloody mouth on his chest, filled with circles and ribbons. There were rows of sharp teeth and several snake heads thrashing inside, with bits of flesh from unknown creatures still hanging there. Suddenly, Nesad's sharp dragon claws reached out and grabbed her. Lilith closed her eyes, her tattoo trembling as she prepared herself to finally accept death. Being eaten by a mouth that large would probably hurt quite a lot, wouldn't it? She only hoped that in the final moment of her life, she might die with a little less pain. However, after waiting for a good while, there was no movement at all. Lilith slowly opened her eyes to find Nesad simply peeling the skin off the fruit with the precision of a church official. Nesad didn't understand the dragon language, so he could only point to the white pulp and then to his own mouth. Then, without caring whether Lilith understood him or not, he left the fruit behind and went back to minding his own business. Lilith had a vague idea of what Nesard was trying to tell her. She took a tentative bite of the soft pulp inside the fruit. Unlike the bittersweet peel, the interior was wonderfully sweet. It was like light bread with added sugar, and she felt a certain energy begin to flow through her body. She felt a bit full, and it was delicious. Lilith nibbled on the banana while keeping a close eye on Nesard. We see Nesard light a campfire and then proceed to build a small stone stove right next to the flames. He found a large, thin stone slab, placed it over the fire, and then reached back into his backpack. He pulled out a massive piece of blood-red meat and pressed it firmly against the heated stone slab. The intense red heat began to sear the meat through the stone. As the meat began to burn and sizzle, it let out a sharp, hissing sound. At the same time, the rich aroma of cooking meat began to fill the entire cave. He told himself this wasn't quite enough, as he still had a few tricks up his sleeve. Nesard gave a small, scornful smile and immediately grabbed a handful of dried plants from his pack. He gripped the plants and crushed them shut with a display of tremendous strength. In an instant, the dried plants were reduced to a fine, aromatic powder. He opened his palm and let the powder slide slowly down, sticking to the half-cooked piece of magical beast meat. In that moment, an incomparably rich scent erupted into the air. The rising smoke spread out, refracting a strange, five-colored glow. If anyone else were in this world of Irilla right now, they would see that the night was destined to be eternal. As it turns out, everything we just saw was merely a vivid hallucination in Nesard's mind. In reality, he was simply using a plain stone slab for his cooking. Using the plants he'd gathered in the jungle for seasoning, he was just making a basic stone slab barbecue. But he felt this added a bit of much-needed fun to the tedious cooking process, especially for a soul from another world like his. With no one to talk to and endless boredom, he had to do something to keep from going completely mad. Lilith watched this strange magical beast, noting how his expression shifted from fierce to deadly serious. At times he would burst into loud laughter, leaving her completely unable to guess what his true intentions were. Nesard held the stone slab and used his dragon claws to carve off a small piece of meat, placing it on a stone tray before Lilith. She wondered if he was asking her to eat. Looking at a piece of meat the size of her own head, she felt a bit stunned. She couldn't understand why this monster was bothering to cook, but the aroma was certainly something else. It smelled delicious, and suddenly, that large banana in her hand didn't seem quite so appetizing anymore. Meanwhile, Nesard had already begun to eat with great enthusiasm. Watching this monster enjoy his meal so thoroughly was quite the sight. Lilith finally found she couldn't resist. It didn't matter that there was no silverware, as she was already used to that. She simply pulled the tray close and began to nibble on the meat. Oh my! The very moment that cut of meat entered her mouth, everything changed. A bittersweet, slightly spicy flavor filled her senses, carrying the rich, savory aroma of perfectly cooked protein. It immediately lifted Lilith's spirits. It was delicious, truly, incredibly delicious. Even before she had finished chewing the first few bites, she simply swallowed it down, realizing she hadn't tasted a meal this good in a very long time. Even after eating, she felt that letting a monster devour such a meal all at once would be a terrible waste. It was delicious, truly delicious, and Lilith ate until she was moved to tears. She had clearly grown accustomed to a numb, difficult life and had simply accepted it as her reality. Eating grass and tree bark by the side of the road had long since stripped away any joy she felt for food. But this meal provided her with a sense of warmth she hadn't felt in a very long time. Imagine being so moved by a meal that it makes you cry. Meanwhile, Nesard simply watched the witch. After the dragon and the girl had finished their dinner, they sat leaning against the stone wall of the cave, staring blankly at one another. Nesard yawned and scratched his head, wondering why, on a whim, he had even brought this person back. To be honest, the child looked to be no more than 10 years old. He hadn't given it much thought at the time, but he knew that if he had left her there, the poor girl would have almost certainly died. He decided to put it out of his mind. He was feeling quite drowsy after such a heavy meal. He told himself he would just sleep for a while, and with that, Nisard slowly closed his eyes. Chapter 26. Shadow, the Bandit Pony. On the third day, Lilith woke up early. She glanced over at Nisard, noting that this fellow had been sleeping for 2 days straight. It seemed as though he had absolutely no intention of paying her any attention at all. She had even tried to escape once, fully expecting the monster to chase her down and catch her. However, no matter how far she ran, he never bothered to look her way, which was a bit insulting, really. Instead, he just continued snoring away inside the cave. Even if she did manage to escape, Lilith had no idea where she could actually go. After attempting to run away several times, she eventually just came back. She realized that running away only meant returning to a diet of wild grass roots and tree bark. Here, at the very least, she had access to those massive banana teeth fruits. The fruit Nisard had given her was between 60 and 70 centimeters long. A single one was more than enough to keep her fed for several days. Over the last 2 days, she had made up her mind. She was going to stay right here. Even if this monster was simply fattening her up to eat her later, she was perfectly willing to accept that trade. She didn't much care for living anyway, and a few days of a full stomach before the end seemed like a fair deal. And so, we find her lost in thought, quietly nibbling on the giant banana fruit. Suddenly, a soft, faint sound echoed from just outside the cave entrance. A moment later, a figure began to slowly emerge from the shadows. The stranger was dressed in a rugged jacket made of worn beast hide. He carried a massive crossbow on his back, with a long sword and a branch-handled dagger tucked into his belt. He moved in total silence, carefully masking his very breath as he approached. He was cautiously scanning the interior of the cave, checking for any signs of danger. Lilith realized something was wrong and immediately cried out, asking who he was. The visitor was visibly startled by Lilith's sudden shout. His eyes locked onto her, freezing him in place just a few meters from the wall. The sharp sting of pain caused the young girl to cry out in alarm. She writhed and struggled against the stone wall, but she found herself completely unable to break free. There was a villain here, she thought, and she desperately wanted to warn Nisard that their lives were in danger. However, as soon as she screamed, the intruder chanted a spell and traced a finger across their own throat. Silence fell instantly, a short-range spell that left her utterly unable to make a sound. Lilith opened her mouth repeatedly, but try as she might, not a single noise would come out. Then, the stranger picked up a stone and tossed it, striking Lilith squarely on the head. Now, we should note that the slumber of a dragon is generally quite difficult to disturb. An ordinary dragon might use a protective barrier to alert them whenever an enemy draws near. They rely on established magic, using the barrier's disturbance as a sort of magical alarm clock. But Nisard, as it turns out, is a naturally heavy sleeper, even by dragon standards. She understands nothing of dragons or magic, so even as Lilith screamed, she simply continued to sleep. Seeing that the dragon beast hadn't stirred, the intruder let out a long sigh of relief. This was an adventurer, though in the continent of Algrenia, they aren't always the heroes found in storybooks. Many adventurers, to be perfectly honest, only take up the trade as a desperate way to earn a living. At any given moment, they might act as sorcerers, thieves, or even cold-blooded assassins. Being thieves as well, it's no wonder the reputation of adventurers in this world is a bit of a mixed bag. And quite clearly, the adventurer standing before her was the type who could kill without blinking an eye. Moni is a black iron rank adventurer who usually accepts mundane contracts to hunt magical beasts. However, in the shadows, she occupies her time with much darker deeds, like murder and robbery. After hearing that the witch had been abducted by a strange magical beast, she followed the trail left by Nisard all the way here. We should be clear, however, that she isn't here to save the poor witch. If Lilith dies, she truly doesn't care. Her only goal is to hunt this beast, skin it, gut it, and harvest its materials. She plans to sell them for a fortune, and as she creeps toward Nisard, she tries to identify the monster's true name. After a careful inspection, and based on her own experience, she concludes it is likely a dragon beast, and she is absolutely delighted. Anything involving dragons is usually quite rare and incredibly valuable, as we might expect. Dragons are, quite literally, walking treasures from head to toe. But the problem remains, how many people actually have the skill required to hunt a dragon? Young dragons are relatively weak, to be sure. Perhaps a few silver rank adventurers could hunt them, but young dragons are usually guarded by a mother, making the task nearly impossible. If it were a full-grown adult dragon, it would be impossible to kill without a gold rank adventurer on the team. But what happens if the creation of certain magical items requires materials that can only be found in a dragon's body? In those cases, magical craftsmen often find themselves settling for the next best thing. They extract and purify the dragon blood found within the bodies of dragon beasts to use in their work. The effect is a bit weaker, of course, but it is certainly better than having nothing at all. Therefore, these dragon-like creatures are often hunted as a more practical alternative to true dragons. Magical beasts containing dragon blood have become increasingly expensive on the market. And looking at the creature before her, aside from the lack of wings, its features are remarkably similar to a true dragon. This suggests that this particular dragon beast possesses a much purer bloodline than most. Such a specimen would be worth a fortune, though Nisard is currently lying face down, keeping the massive mouth on her chest hidden. The two eyes beneath the darkness aren't open either, and to be perfectly honest, it looks like an ordinary dragon beast. Moni decided to cast a detection spell, hoping to uncover the true level of the dragon blood within. When she discovered this beast was only level 15, she felt an immediate sense of relief and ecstasy all at once. If a dragon beast like this could be captured alive and brought back to the human kingdom, it could be sold for tens of thousands of gold coins, perhaps even more. Once a dragon beast falls asleep, its vigilance drops considerably, making this the absolute best time to hunt it. Using the ring on her hand, she pulled out a roll of netting, carefully draped it over Nisard, and began chanting a spell. This great net immediately tightened, binding Nisard firmly in place. Finding it was only level 15 made her feel both relieved and thrilled as the creature's guard was down. She used her ring to pull out a net and carefully covered Nisard with it. It turned out to be a magical beast lasso, designed to imprison a selected unit, especially when the target is a magical creature. The binding effect is increased by 50%. This is fine steel-level magical equipment, and given the level of this beast, breaking free should be impossible. At this point, we see she is finally ready to wake the dragon beast up. Next, Moni pulled out a fine steel demon-hunting silver crossbow. The fine steel bolt is tipped with holy silver, possessing the power to break through both magic and armor. It deals double damage to undead creatures and those of the Blood Clan, which is quite a punch, naturally. A dragon beast of this size is far too large for her to carry away on her own. Therefore, her plan is to capture the beast right here and then proceed to tame it. And now, she is preparing a rather sharp greeting for Nisard. Moni smiled viciously as she took aim with the fine steel crossbow. She aimed directly at Nisard's neck and pulled the trigger with a sharp crack. The fine steel bolt pierced right through Nisard's scales and sank deep into the flesh. Suddenly, Nisard's scarlet eyes snapped wide open. The pain was excruciating, yet just as he tried to stand, he discovered his legs were trapped. They were firmly bound, and in that moment, he realized the gravity of his situation. His body was covered in ropes, and standing before him was a man with a thick beard and mustache. The stranger was watching him with a look that was both cruel and deeply greedy. We see the stats: Moni, a level 24 shadow bandit, and a level 10 bloodblade slave. Alongside them were a level 14 miner and a level 4 shadow bandit. Nisard was utterly stunned. Why on earth would a level 4 shadow bandit even show up here? In his shock, Nisard began to look around at his surroundings. That was when he saw Lilip pinned to the stone wall by a massive crossbow bolt, with blood dripping down. Her entire spiked shell had been pierced through, and her current state remained unknown. The man barked at him, asking where he was looking and declaring that his master was right here. Bernie then pulled out a whip tipped with iron spikes and brutally struck Nisard. This whip is also a piece of magical equipment, stained dark with the blood of many victims. Some of that blood belongs to magical beasts, as one might expect, but some of it is human. This cruel, heartless man doesn't limit himself to hunting monsters. Nisard remained frozen in a state of complete disbelief. He stared at the level 14 miner and the level 4 shadow bandit standing before him. Again, his eyes drifted back to Lilip, pinned to the stone wall by that massive bolt, blood still trickling down. It's a grim realization. All of this blood came from people. And some of that blood belongs to people. Yes, it truly does. It was human blood, plain and simple. Bernie stood there, momentarily stunned by the situation. He looked over at the level 14 miner and the level 4 shadow bandit. Nisard, for his part, remained frozen in utter shock. He stared at Lilip, pinned to the stone wall by that massive bolt, blood still trickling down. Realizing all this blood was human made Bernie shudder violently. She had once purchased a language infusion service at the guild. This particular service, you see, can infuse multiple languages into the brain for rapid learning. Because of this, she was actually able to understand the dragon tongue that Nisard spoke. It became clear that this dragon beast possessed a genuine, waking consciousness. We should keep in mind that dragon beasts are usually just magical creatures with a trace of dragon blood. They might possess a faint glimmer of intelligence, but never the human-level intellect of a true dragon. And a dragon beast with a mind of its own? Well, that makes it several times more dangerous. Bernie felt a sudden chill of unease and took 2 steps back, hesitating. She wondered if she should run, yet she knew her level was far higher than Nisard's. That thought gave her confidence, and her greed to capture the beast kept her from retreating. Under her disbelieving gaze, Nisard opened his mouth and easily snapped the supposedly indestructible bindings. One of the hidden effects of his beast bite is the literal destruction of natural laws. Against a bite like that, even a demigod would lose a limb if they were caught off guard. They would lose a chunk of flesh, so a mere magical rope didn't stand a chance. Chapter 27. Thorntooth must explode. Bernie uses Shadow Step, transforming into a dark blur as she turns to escape the cave in a desperate rush. It was a tight squeeze, and the terrible roar of this dragon beast echoed relentlessly in her ears. Her back was completely drenched in a cold sweat. Deep down, she knew this monster was extremely dangerous. Even though she technically outranked the dragon beast before her by many levels, she knew levels aren't everything. A level is merely a reference point for measuring combat power between members of the same species. But a dragon of the same level against a human? Well, that is a different story entirely. It is, without a doubt, a crushing defeat. A dragon entering adulthood naturally reaches the silver level at level 30. And as they age, the highest level a dragon in its adult stage can reach is level 50. In any normal situation, a dragon hunting team composed of human adventurers might need to deploy several silver-level warriors. They would also need a gold-level adventurer just to hold the line. Only then might they successfully defeat even the lowest-level adult dragon. At level 30, the price of success would inevitably come with heavy casualties. And this dragon beast before us obviously possesses a very high concentration of dragon blood. After all, it broke through the high-level bindings with ease, which should have been impossible. The Shadow Step Bernie used is a powerful ability belonging to the Shadow Thief class. It allows her to merge with the darkness and travel between shadows at high speed, whether she's trying to escape. Whether for a sneak attack or a quiet infiltration, it is an extremely versatile skill to have. She told herself that the dragon beast shouldn't be able to catch her now. Bernie looked back, feeling a brief wave of relief now that the immediate danger seemed to have passed. And yet, she continued to scan her surroundings with a great deal of caution. It was a cursed half-breed, after all, and it had managed to shatter her bindings, which was no small feat. Bernie cursed under her breath, already planning her return to the human city to recruit a proper team of adventurers. Her goal, of course, was to return and defeat this dragon beast once and for all. She told herself that this entire journey simply could not end up being a total loss. The ring on her hand glowed softly, and suddenly she was holding a small bottle of blue potion. This was a mana recovery potion, a staple for many adventurers, as using skills constantly drains one's internal energy. This is especially true when one is forced to use Shadow Step continuously to stay alive. She was just about to tilt her head back to drink when she noticed a sudden red flash in the thicket by the road. Who was there? Bernie immediately snapped her gaze in that direction, her heart racing. It was the dragon beast, lurking right there in the shadows and watching her with those piercing scarlet eyes. She wondered, with a growing sense of dread, how on earth this creature could move so fast. At this point, Bernie couldn't even worry about drinking her potion. She immediately spun around and transformed back into a blur of shadow to make her escape. She fled in the opposite direction, yet the dragon beast seemed to be almost teletransporting. No matter which way she turned or how fast she ran, the beast was always there, waiting for her. Driven by fear, Bernie used Shadow Step repeatedly, throwing every trick she had into staying alive. Whether it was a desperate attack or a frantic defense, she used every tool in her arsenal. Her mana was being consumed at an alarming rate, and Nisard gave her no opportunity to replenish it. Quickly, she found herself completely exhausted and entirely out of mana. And it was at this precise moment that Nisard's true body finally appeared. Those figures that had surrounded Bernie just a moment ago, they were all divine dragon illusions created by Nisard using illusory light. As someone who had transformed into a dragon beast himself, he knew from experience that a cornered animal will fight, and a human even more so. If Bernie still had some hidden trick up her sleeve, Nisard knew he could still end up failing. What would happen then? Well, after a long period of testing her, Nisard finally confirmed the truth. Every single one of Bernie's tricks had finally been exhausted. You see, Nisard's exploration eye allows him to detect the exact state of his prey. And in his world, the more mana a target has, the more delicious they are. And now, we see Bernie trying to calculate her next move, however clumsily. It was time. Bernie stared fixedly at the dragon beast standing right in front of her. This time she didn't run, because she desperately needed to drink a bottle of blue potion to replenish her mana. Suddenly, the figure of the dragon beast before her shattered directly into points of light. She stared at the broken light in a daze, shocked to realize that it had been nothing but a fake. Where was the real dragon beast? Roars like explosive thunder suddenly erupted. The sound rang in her ears, and she felt something cold beginning to envelop her. She spun around, only to find herself facing those scarlet eyes directly. He told her quite clearly that he would make her wish she had never been born. She would beg for a death that would not come. That was the promise Nisard sent her way. And here, Nisard discovered that this woman seemed to understand his language perfectly. Suddenly, a massive maw opened wide, and Bernie found herself bound by the 3 bone whips of his tail. These 3 bone whips were equipped with mouthparts that sank directly into Bernie's shoulders, shattering her bones. Churning deep inside her, Nisard's bone whips revealed their hidden, predatory nature. Inside were needle-sharp fangs, which Nisard manipulated to tear through Bernie's flesh with ease. They bit directly into her skeleton, and we can almost hear the sickening crunch of bone. Bernie's consciousness remained agonizingly clear. She realized then that Nisard was no ordinary opponent. In this realm, her vitality was far too vigorous, meaning she could feel every single detail of the assault. She felt her bones being gnawed away, piece by agonizing piece. Was it fear? To be honest, it was a suffocating mix of despair and pure physical pain. She couldn't break free, and one has to wonder how many victims had died under her own abuse. And now, in a twist of fate, every bit of that suffering was being returned to her. As it turns out, the price for harming the witch is to meet a truly wretched end. Nisard had become her executioner, ensuring her life was now a state far worse than death. "Kill me, just kill me," was the only thought behind Bernie's screams of pain. The cries echoed through the forest, but her eyes were filled with a desperation that replaced her former ferocity. Nisard didn't care for her look, and with a grotesque smile, he began to manipulate one of the bone whips. It forced its way into Bernie's eye socket, crushing and consuming the eyeball instantly. The bone whip churned inside her head, though it carefully avoided damaging the brain itself. All of Bernie's 5 senses began to fail as the trauma to her head took its toll. Only her brain remained active to receive the endless waves of pain, perhaps out of gluttony, or perhaps the dragon beast's inherent cruelty. This transformation allows him to torture a human who wants him dead without any psychological burden whatsoever. What angers him even more is the fact that Lilith now belongs to him. She is his property. And since she is Ness's property, only Ness has the right to decide her fate. Bernie's entire body has been reduced to a mangled mess, trembling occasionally as she begs for death. She no longer has the strength to scream, and Ness, growing bored, has finally tired of the game. And so, the ever-so-kind Master Ness decides to grant her final request. In a single, brutal motion, he nearly tore Bernie's head off with one bite and swallowed it whole. Nisar let out a terrifying screech, caught between the identities of a human and a dragon beast. In this life, he is a dragon beast, and that identity carries its own heavy weight. He finds himself in a natural conflict of interest with humanity. Humans either want to kill him for his materials or force him into a life of slavery. Even if he tried to please those humans, one has to wonder, would it even be useful? The answer is no. They aren't the same species, yet the soul of a human still resides within Nisar. He had always felt a sense of contradiction and separation, but now, he has finally realized the truth. His identity doesn't actually matter, as that cannot be changed. What truly matters is his resolve. When facing those who want to hurt or kill him, it makes no difference if they are human. Whether they are an elf, an orc, or even a magical beast, the result remains the same. Or anything else, even a dragon, they must all die. As he processed these thoughts, the mountain and sea catalog seemingly sensed Nisar's inner transformation. A new piece of information penetrated his mind. He must devour the shadow dragon beast, Bernie. He is to obtain the shadow affinity trait and gain the multivariate domain knowledge of the Aurea continent. By completing the Cruel Avenger achievement, he illuminates the beast Yazi and awakens the skill, Sure Vengeance. We see the image of the mountain and sea catalog slowly appearing before his eyes, a page dedicated to a different beast. It slowly manifested right above Nisar's head. Yazi, as it turns out, is a divine beast from the ancient legends and myths of his previous life. As the saying goes, the dragon has 9 sons, and each one is entirely different from the others. Yazi is the second of those 9 sons, a creature with the body of a jackal and the head of a dragon. One might wonder why it is said that a dragon could be born from a jackal. Ancient books record that his very nature is defined by a thirst for blood. He loves to fight, and his personality is, to put it mildly, incredibly strong. Brave and skilled in combat, bloodthirsty and fond of the kill, Yazi's virtue is that every kindness must be repaid. But Yazi's grudges must also be avenged. With unextinguished ambition and a killer's heart, he becomes the incarnation of slaying all evil. Under the cover of night, a crimson light merged into both of Nisar's eyes. His eyes were now completely clouded with blood. His hair stood on end with pure rage as his eyes began to evolve once again. Chapter 28, Yazi, and the rule that Yazi's virtue must always be rewarded. The vengeance of the Fong mark is now entirely inevitable. That description, as we can see, fits Nisar perfectly. We return to the moment when Istitu was trapped on that small island. Even though he was threatened by Salga to rescue his younger sister, if Nisar had truly wanted to, Salga, certainly, would not have been able to stop him. So, Nisar's mindset at that moment was entirely voluntary. He chose to rescue Istitu, much like the kindness of an old man distributing food. Looking at it that way, it actually fits the specific personality of the Fong mark perfectly. The units to which the Fong mark offers its favors or grudges will be assigned. Unmasked units within a certain distance can be detected at the same time. Within another range, the malice of entities toward oneself will be detected. A divine skill. This is absolutely a divine skill. First, there is the ability to mark units. It is equivalent to a powerful tracking ability. Combined with the Eye of Steel, enemy units have nowhere to hide. Once he locks onto them, they cannot escape. Furthermore, the perception of malice is the ultimate divine skill. Take this time as an example. The reason Nissar was ambushed is that dragons are very vulnerable while sleeping. If Bernie had intended to kill him directly rather than capture him, Nissar would have been at a great disadvantage. Now, this problem is solved. Fang Mark is a passive skill that perceives malice even while he sleeps. Looking at the headless corpse, Nissar decided he couldn't bear to leave it exposed, so he burned it. He fumbled through the ashes but found no golden stone. He spat on the remains, calling them useless. He wondered if only dragons left relics, but fortunately, he had also obtained a multiracial language pack. In the future, while walking across the Aurea continent, he won't have to worry about language barriers. In his hand, he holds a spatial ring confiscated from Bernie, the kind used by most adventurers for gear. Nissar wants to open it, but it requires a secret command, so for now, he simply tucks it into his pocket. He realized he had to return to collect Lilith's body, sighing as he thought of the witch he'd just acquired. If he could train her well, she might even become his own spatial ring one day. We should keep in mind that while witches belong to the human race, they are one of the few units on the side of evil, and this particular witch template has quite strong growth. Her attributes and potential are not at all inferior to those of a dragon, yet when he returned to the cave, he saw Lilith sitting against the stone wall, very much alive. Nissar returned to find that Lilith wasn't dead, as she still had a breath of life left in her, though he was confused because she had been pinned to the wall and the sword was still there. The blade remained embedded in the stone. Wondering how Lilith had managed to get down, he stepped closer and examined the crossbow bolt. The shaft of the bolt was covered in blood that had already begun to dry. This little brat had moved bit by bit, letting the blade pass completely through her left shoulder until she finally fell free. Such terrible willpower is rare. A normal person would have died from blood loss a long time ago. However, Lilith's current state is far from optimistic. Her skin was already naturally pale, but now it has lost even more of its color. If she were simply left here like this, he feared she would surely kick the bucket. Nissar rummaged through his bag of pigweed and found some herbs capable of detoxifying. He also found some that could boost her vitality, and then he located a skull to use as a bowl. He placed the herbs inside, crushed them, and prepared a herbal poultice for Lilith. He didn't dare put them directly into her mouth, however. Nissar's saliva and fangs contain venom, a slight occupational hazard, one might say. While a doctor might resist it, he wasn't so sure about this little girl. After pouring the medicine, he used his sharp nails to lift the herbs and apply them to Lilith's wound. Lilith didn't cry or make a sound, instead choosing to squeeze her eyes shut tightly. Her body trembled slightly from the pain, and Nissar watched her, thinking that this child was surprisingly resilient. Knowing he truly wanted to help her, he did his best to treat her wounds, leaving the rest of Lilith's fate, whether she lived or died, to the heavens. At this point, she could only entrust herself to luck. Lilith fell asleep almost immediately, and Nissar began to recap the recent battle and the spoils he had gathered. First, there was the achievement of Swanee, which seemed to be independent of his other powers. Then we have evolution, another fascinating function of the Swanee illustration. The skills it grants are far more powerful and easier to use than the strength he obtained from those magic beasts. Nissar analyzed the situation. On one hand, he had been holding Isti tightly, while on the other, he was killing the enemy. He had tortured the Shadow Bandit invader with cruel methods specifically to activate his new power. So, that was the second dragon's son, Yazi, and since the dragon has 9 sons, he wondered about the other 8. Could they be activated one after another? Thinking of this, Nissar couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. But of course, things must always be taken one step at a time. As he thought clearly, he realized there was still one nagging problem that needed to be solved. He pulled out the spatial ring he had taken from Bernie. The trouble was, it could only be opened with a very specific spell. However, Bernie was quite dead, making it impossible to ask him for the password. It was no use just keeping it as a souvenir, so Nissar arched his eyebrows and thought. If he could devour magic beasts to gain talents and skills, he wondered what would happen if he swallowed magic equipment instead. With that thought in mind, Nissar decided it was worth taking a bit of a risk. After all, the spatial ring was just sitting there, doing nothing. There was no way to monetize it here, so he figured, why not see if there was some hidden benefit to eating it? Without a second thought, Nissar tossed the ring directly into his mouth. There was no need to chew, he simply swallowed it whole. Sure enough, a second later, that strange, otherworldly information began to emerge once again. The system detected a mythical characteristic within the spatial ring and began the fusion process. A new talent inheritance appeared, Yushin, the mark of a true man, Zanshin. It spoke of a long-winged fox with 5 life auras, capable of transforming into the very heavens and earth. And finally, it possessed the sun and the moon, a truly magnificent Yushin. The legend tells of this true man, Zanshin, from ancient times. He carried a water fox that seemed ordinary, but actually concealed an entire world within itself. This fox could change at will, and once deployed, it became its own realm with a sun, moon, and stars. With landscapes and vegetation indistinguishable from the real world, there was nothing false about it. Now, he realized he could contain external objects within his own body. In a strange twist of fate, he had essentially become a living spatial ring. But putting the absurdity aside, this innate ability was actually incredibly convenient. It was exactly like having a portable storage space built right into his being. This meant he would no longer have to carry a heavy backpack full of pig dragon grass everywhere. With that thought in mind, he decided to activate the Yushin ability for the first time. Within his consciousness, a vast space of approximately 60 cubic meters suddenly appeared. The space was dark, yet he could clearly perceive every single item stored within it. And so, we see the awakening of Nashad's Yushin displacement. The items that had been originally stored within that space were now released by him. A dazzling array of books, potions, and equipment was laid out right in front of Nashad. For a brief moment, the sheer variety of it all made him feel a little lightheaded. All of these, we must remember, were the treasures originally kept in Bernie's spatial ring. Since the ring had been swallowed, everything inside had naturally transferred into Nashad's Yushin. What a delight this was, the magnificent Yushin technique of our young Nashad. As the old saying goes, there is a certain golden fortune to be found in the spoils of conflict. He thought of his own hard work, gathering heavy bags of pig dragon grass. How much could that possibly be worth? In this pile before him, there were at least a few hundred glittering gold coins. It seems adventurers who live by the sword and the steel are far wealthier than those who complete honest missions. They say he who endures the bitterest of hardships becomes a master among men. Ordinary adventurers spend their days carrying out perfectly normal mission requests. How long would it take them to reach this level of wealth? Simple suffering doesn't make you a master, it just leaves you hungry. If one truly wishes to become a master of men, one would have to be as bold as Nashad. Chapter 29, The Disaster of Lilith. Lilith finally wakes up. Her body felt weak, but thankfully, the throbbing pain in her head had subsided. The first thing she noticed was that the wound through her left shoulder had healed, covered by a handful of medicinal herbs. Right there in front of her sat half a bottle of a strange red concoction. She could still taste the remnants of the medicinal liquid on the corners of her mouth. She had seen these during her travels, the healing potions used by adventurers to quickly mend their wounds. She still remembered quite clearly that before she lost consciousness, that monster had actually applied medicine to her wounds. Why would he save me, she wondered. All of Wanji was gone now. The figure of that monster, the Nepenthes backpack he carried, the plants, and all the scattered belongings, everything had vanished. Have I been abandoned again? Lilith felt an inexplicable sense of loss heavy in her heart. Deep down, she was certain that the dragon beast wasn't nearly as evil as he appeared on the surface. She pulled her legs close, huddling alone in the dark corner of the cave. In that moment, she felt she no longer had the courage to go on. She buried her face in her knees and sobbed. Suddenly, a hiccup, or rather, an extremely terrifying roar, made Lilith snap her head up in surprise. Just outside the cave, the silhouette of that very same monster slowly began to emerge. He was grumbling about what a wretched place this was, where even catching a wild rabbit felt like a chore. Nizar walked slowly into the cave, dangling 2 small rabbits from his hand. He had imagined that after escaping the forest swamp, he would find himself in a vast, new world. Unexpectedly, due to the fall of the human nation of Piling, the magical and wild beasts had been hunted nearly to extinction. He had been out hunting for the better part of the day, only to return with 2 rabbits no larger than his palm. And to make matters worse, these were just perfectly ordinary wild animals. Common wild beasts like these, as we can imagine, weren't nearly enough to fill his stomach. If things continued like this, he worried about how he would ever manage to level up. As Nizar entered the cave, preoccupied with thoughts of food and evolution, he was met with a surprise. He saw Lilith suddenly rushing toward him, throwing her arms around his legs and holding on tight. Nizar, for his part, was left standing there completely baffled by the situation. He wondered what on earth this brat was trying to do, or what she thought she was accomplishing. Nizar gave his legs a gentle shake, attempting to dislodge Lilith from his shins. But Lilith only clung tighter. Then, as a realization struck her, she looked up at Nizar with a stunned expression. She realized that this monster could actually speak the human language. She begged him to let her follow. Her voice was clear and melodic, carrying a strange, almost enchanting power. Nizar was more confused than ever. It seemed he had accidentally grabbed hold of a very complicated future. But just as he reached down to pull her away, he suddenly felt something quite unexpected. A strange energy was flowing steadily from Lilith's body directly into his own. He had felt this sensation once before when he saved her and used his inspection eye to observe her. Back then, he could see that her body was radiating a sort of ominous black aura. The demon's own energy seemed to be drawing his eyes toward a dark, looming fate. It appeared that dealing with Lilith's current state was going to be rather complicated. Deep within her, the forces of night and battle were stirring in a chaotic rhythm. As the system processed the data, identifying the malevolent energy and the strange patterns within her, Nizar was left wondering what this blind plan actually was. To be perfectly honest, the whole situation was becoming incredibly bizarre. A calamitous demon? Luck -1, luck -1. He realized with horror that his luck was being drained continuously. Nizar panicked and shouted for her to let go immediately, knowing that in this world, luck is a vital and rare attribute. Critical hits, dangerous encounters, and even the quality of loot from treasure chests all depend on this mysterious stat. For instance, when Nizar goes out, his luck determines if he finds magical beasts, wild animals, or, heaven forbid, adventurers. The worst-case scenario is running into an adventurer party, as they are smarter, stronger, and possess far better coordination. In other words, they are incredibly difficult to defeat, and even if you do, they have countless ways to escape, making the whole effort feel quite useless, really. But there is a far worse scenario for Nizar, as a black iron dragonling. He is invincible in his own territory, but the moment he steps outside his cave, he might stumble upon a passing demigod who, depending on his mood, might keep him as a pet or simply decide to decapitate him on the spot. We must also consider the necromancers, a group possessing a terrifying ability known as the Will of Death, a spell that brings a sudden end to everything. In this world, combat isn't just about strength. It involves complex calculations of bias, active turns, and the various buffs and debuffs affecting both sides. And the most important factor is luck. If a person's luck is low enough, even a 1 in a million chance of instant death becomes a very real, very final threat. For players like Nizar, if their luck stat drops too low, the game essentially becomes unplayable, a truly desperate situation that was now unfolding before our eyes. As Nizar tried to shake her off, Lilith only clung tighter. During the struggle, Nizar's arm suddenly cramped, and the 2 rabbits he'd caught managed to leap free. He watched them run off in disbelief. The consequences of low luck were appearing already, for how else could a sturdy iron dragon suffer a random muscle cramp? Nizar gave a gentle shove that sent Lilith tumbling back, but as she began to crawl toward him again, the dragon who feared nothing felt a surge of genuine panic. He actually retreated 2 steps, shouting that he had saved her and she shouldn't be so ungrateful. Hearing this, Lilith stopped halfway and began to sob. By interacting with the Calamity Witch, he had triggered an abnormal status, beset by misfortune, a curse that was now firmly latched onto his soul. This effect systematically eliminates any positive outcomes in his life, while giving negative events a 30% higher chance of occurring. The only way to remove this curse is to obtain the witch's forgiveness. Nizar could only stare in shock, wondering how his life had taken such a turn. You see, the probability of being killed by a stray banana peel is never zero, and bad luck has a way of turning those tiny, discrete coincidences into fatal accidents. To survive in this world, Nizar realized he had to act quickly, so he approached Lilith and gently patted her small head with his large dragon claws. He promised she could follow him and that he wouldn't abandon her. Lilith looked up, her face stained with tears, wondering if he truly meant it. She jumped up to hug him, but Nizar quickly stepped aside, explaining that his evil aura might hurt her if they stayed in contact for too long. Lilith insisted she didn't mind, but Nizar flatly refused, claiming he was deeply concerned for her future safety, which was a bit of a stretch, to be honest. Lilith felt a twinge of disappointment, yet she told herself that perhaps the dragon had only pushed her away because he cared so much for her well-being. Nizar's little white lie, one of the 3 great illusions of Lilith's life, would eventually cause him endless trouble, even if the curse itself were to disappear. It's often said that little girls are easy to please, and Nizar sighed in relief, though he knew his luck would only recover very slowly once the curse lifted. As we turn the page, we see Nizar enjoyed a pleasant sleep, despite the fact that he hadn't caught any prey and had to go to bed on an empty stomach. The next morning, Nizar looked around and realized that Lilith had vanished. He wondered if she had run away, despite her promise to follow him. He told himself this was excellent news, as keeping the Calamity Witch around only brought misfortune, and he decided it was time for him to leave this poor territory too. Just as he prepared to find a new hunting ground, he heard faint footsteps outside the cave. He wondered if someone had come to hunt dragons again, a death wish, clearly. Since he hadn't eaten yesterday, he figured a couple of humans would fill his stomach, but as he turned with a fierce gaze, he was left completely stunned. Lilith walked in clutching several reddish-purple fruits. Seeing his terrifying expression, she stammered that she had only gone out to gather breakfast for him.